The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Warp fields bend space, matter and antimatter react predictably, and even the chaotic energies within the Delphic expanse follow measurable patterns. But what happens when something defies every sensor, every theory, every rational explanation? What happens when the impossible doesn't just arrive? It awakens. The NX-01 Enterprise drifted through the debris field at 1/4 impulse, her hull plating still scarred from the Shindy crisis that had nearly destroyed Earth. Captain Jonathan Archer stood on the bridge, exhausted but alert, watching the viewscreen display the remnants of spatial anomalies that had torn this region of space apart months ago. The Delphic expanse was gone, collapsed into normal space, but its ghost remained. Pockets of unstable subspace, fragments of destroyed vessels, and mysteries that would take decades to catalog. "Captain!" Ensign Hoshi Sato called from communications, her voice tight with confusion. "I'm picking up a signal. I don't know what it is." "Define don't know," Archer said, moving toward her station. "It's not a distress call. It's not any language in our database. It's rhythmic like a heartbeat, but there's structure to it. Mathematical patterns." She adjusted her earpiece, frowning. "It's coming from bearing 147 Mark II. Commander T'Pol raised an eyebrow from her science station, her Vulcan features impassive as her fingers moved across her console. Sensors detect a large metallic object approximately 2,000 meters distant. Configuration unknown. No energy signature consistent with conventional propulsion systems. On screen. Archer ordered. The view screen shifted, magnifying the object until it filled the display. The bridge fell silent. It was massive, far larger than any human, drifting in the vacuum like a discarded statue. The armor was ornate Baroque, covered in eagles and scripture, trimmed in gold and deep blue that caught the starlight. One gauntlet hand still gripped an enormous sword, its blade etched with text that seemed to shimmer even in the void. The figure's helmet bore a laurel wreath crest, and though the faceplate was dark, there was an unmistakable sense of nobility to its design. "Is that a person?" Lieutenant Malcolm Reed whispered from Tactical. "Biosigns are present," T'Pol reported, her tone carefully neutral despite the impossibility of what her instruments told her. "Faint but stable. The armor appears to be maintaining life support. Internal temperature reading suggests the subject has been in stasis for an extended period." Commander Charles Tripp Tucker leaned forward from the engineering station, his southern drawl thick with disbelief. "Captain, that armor's gotta be at least 3 meters tall. Whatever's inside it." "Bring it aboard," Archer decided. "Cargo Bay 2. Malcolm, have a security team standing by, but tell them to keep their phase pistols holstered unless I give the word. Hoshi, keep monitoring that signal." "Aye, Captain," Reed acknowledged, though his hand remained near his own weapon. The transporter beam deposited the armored figure onto the cargo bay deck with a resonant clang that echoed through the Enterprise's corridors. Dr. Phlox arrived within minutes, his denobulan features stretched in scientific fascination as he circled the giant with a medical tricorder. Mako stood at every entrance, their rifles trained on the motionless form. "Extraordinary," Phlox murmured. "The armor is fused to the occupant at multiple points, neural interfaces, circulatory connections, even what appears to be waste recycling systems. This isn't protective equipment. It's a complete life support environment designed for extended combat operations." "Can you wake him?" Archer asked. "I believe he's already waking himself," Phlox said, stepping back quickly. "The armor systems are coming online. I'm detecting increased neural activity, elevated heart rate, singular heart, remarkably large, and muscular response." The sword moved first. It was subtle, just a slight tightening of the massive gauntlet around the hilt, but every weapon in the room instantly trained on the figure. Then the helmet turned, servos whining softly as the head lifted. The faceplate flickered, internal systems powering up, and twin eye lenses ignited with pale blue light. Roboute Guilliman, Lord Commander of the Imperium, Primarch of the Ultramarines, avenging son of the Emperor of Mankind, assessed his situation with the tactical clarity that had won 1,000 campaigns across 100 worlds. He was alive. That was unexpected. The warp storm had torn reality itself, and he'd thrown himself into it in pursuit of the word-bearer's corruption that threatened the subsector. He remembered the sensation of being pulled apart across dimensions, the Emperor's sword blazing in his hands as he'd cut through demons that had poured through the breach. He remembered darkness, cold, and then nothing. Now he was surrounded by humans. Primitive humans, judging by their equipment. Their weapons were chemical-based projectiles or perhaps crude energy weapons, nothing that would threaten the armor of fate even in its current damaged state. The room was cramped, inefficient, built for normal human proportions. A spacecraft, clearly, but the technology was archaic. Pre-Imperial? No. Different. Wrong. He sat up slowly, the motion deliberate and controlled despite his disorientation. The humans retreated, weapons raised, shouting in a language he didn't immediately recognize. His armor's autosenses processed the auditory data, running linguistic analysis protocols from the fragmentary databanks that had survived the warp translation. English. Archaic English. Modified with technological terms he didn't recognize, but the root language was from Terra's ancient history. "Lower your weapons," he said, his voice a deep rumble amplified by his armor's vox speakers. He spoke in Gothic first, then, as his armor's cogitator completed its analysis, switched to the English variant they were using. "I am not your enemy." The humans froze. A man in a blue and black uniform stepped forward, middle-aged, with the bearing of a commander despite his primitive equipment. Behind him, a Vulcan, Guilliman's enhanced pattern recognition identified the pointed ears and characteristic features, watched with calculating intensity. "I'm Captain Jonathan Archer of the Starship Enterprise," the man said carefully. "You're aboard an Earth vessel. We found you drifting in space. Can you tell us who you are?" Guilliman's mind raced. Earth vessel. English speakers. But the Vulcan's presence suggested Xeno's integration, and the technology level indicated this was either a lost colonial expedition or something else entirely. The dimensional breach. The impossible energies he'd felt as reality tore around him. The complete absence of the Astronomican's guiding light in his mind. He was not in the Imperium anymore. Possibly not even in his own galaxy. And if these were humans who cooperated openly with Xenos, who built their ships with such inefficient designs, who carried themselves without the militant discipline of the Astra Militarum, or the Adeptus Astartes, this was either humanity's distant past, or an alternate reality where the Emperor's vision had never come to pass. Either way, the truth would doom him here. They would never understand. Never accept. A demigod from a galaxy of eternal war, from an Imperium built on the corpses of countless Xenos species and heretics, from a future where humanity ruled through force and faith, he would be seen as a monster, a threat, something to be contained or destroyed. So Roboute Guilliman, who had rebuilt the Imperium through both honesty and pragmatism, made a tactical decision. He would lie. Not completely, the best lies were wrapped in truth, but enough to survive, to understand this place, and to determine if these humans could be saved from whatever weakness had led them to embrace Xenos as equals. "I am Roboute Guilliman," he said, slowly rising to his full height. The humans gasped as he stood, towering over them at 3 meters tall in his armor. "I am from a colony, a human colony, that developed differently than yours. We faced threats you cannot imagine. We adapted. Evolved. Became what we needed to be to survive." Archer's eyes narrowed. "What kind of threats?" Guilliman met his gaze. "The kind that make you choose between extinction and transformation. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper." The Vulcan woman stepped forward, her tricorder scanning him with technology that made his armor's machine's spirit bristle with indignation at being so thoroughly analyzed. "Captain, his physiology is extraordinary. Enhanced bone density, multiple redundant organs, muscular structure that exceeds any known human variant. This level of genetic modification would require technology far beyond current Earth capabilities. We had time," Guilliman said simply. "And necessity. When the Xenos came to our world, we had two choices: become stronger or die. We chose to endure." The word Xenos made several of the humans exchange glances. The Vulcan's eyebrow rose fractionally. "You're saying your colony was attacked by alien species?" Archer asked. "Attacked. Enslaved. Nearly exterminated. All true in the broader sense. We fought back. We won. And we made certain it would never happen again." Trip Tucker approached cautiously, his eyes wide with engineering fascination as he examined the armor's exterior. "Captain, this is incredible. Look at these power conduits. I've never seen anything like this configuration. And this metal, it's not duranium, not tritanium. I don't even know what it is." "Ceramite," Guilliman provided. "Bonded at the molecular level. Nearly indestructible." "Nearly?" Malcolm Reed asked, his tactical mind engaged despite his obvious unease. Guilliman's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the Emperor's sword. "Nothing is truly indestructible, Lieutenant. Everything breaks eventually. The question is whether you break first, or your enemy does." Phlox circled around, his medical curiosity overriding his caution. "Mr. Guilliman, I'll need to run a full medical examination. Your biology is fascinating, and I need to ensure you're not suffering any adverse effects from your time in stasis." "I am functional," Guilliman said. But even as he spoke, he felt the damage. The Armor of Fate's systems were reporting failures across multiple subsystems. Shield generators were offline. The teleportation matrix was completely destroyed. Secondary weapons systems were non-responsive. The armor would self-repair given time. Its ancient mechanisms were designed for exactly that, but he was vulnerable in ways he hadn't been in centuries. And the Emperor's sword. He could feel its power humming through his gauntlet, the psychic resonance that could obliterate demons and cleave through reality itself. But in this place, wherever this was, he sensed no warp, no immaterium, no chaos. The sword would still cut, still kill, but its true power, the Emperor's own will made manifest, felt distant, muffled, as if he held it through thick glass. He was alone. Truly alone. For the first time since his resurrection in the 41st millennium, there was no Imperium, no chapter, no armies of the faithful. Just one Primarch, damaged and isolated, surrounded by humans who had somehow built a civilization without the Emperor's guidance. It was both horrifying and fascinating. "I will submit to your examination," Guilliman said finally, lowering himself back to a seated position with controlled grace. "But I require information in exchange. Where am I? What year is this by your reckoning? And—" He looked at the Vulcan woman, his enhanced eyes noting every detail of her alien physiology. "Why do you allow Xenos to walk your ship as equals?" Paul's expression didn't change, but Archer's jaw tightened. "Because they are our equals, Mr. Guilliman. The Vulcans are our allies. Our friends. They helped us reach the stars." Guilliman absorbed this information with the analytical precision of a master strategist. These humans didn't just tolerate Xenos, they embraced them. Considered them friends. Had built their entire spacefaring civilization on the foundation of Xenos' assistance. Everything the Emperor had fought against. Everything the Imperium had been created to prevent. And yet, they had survived. Prospered even in their limited way. How? Why? What had allowed them to avoid the fate of countless other human civilizations consumed by treacherous Xenos? "Fascinating," he said quietly, and meant it. Captain Archer extended his hand, a gesture Guilliman recognized from ancient Terran customs. "Welcome aboard the Enterprise, Mr. Guilliman. You've had a rough journey. Let's get you settled, and then we can figure out where you're from and how to get you home. Guilliman looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then, carefully, he extended his own massive gauntlet and engulfed Archer's hand in a gentle grip that could have crushed steel. "Thank you, Captain," he said. "I suspect we have much to learn from each other." The medical bay hummed with diagnostic equipment as Dr. Phlox completed his fifth scan of Guilliman's physiology, each pass revealing new impossibilities that challenged everything the denobulan physician thought he understood about human biology. "Remarkable," Phlox muttered, adjusting his scanner for the 13th time. "You have 3 lungs, Captain Archer." "3. And a second heart." "Well, technically a dual-chambered redundant cardiovascular system that functions as both backup and enhancement to your primary heart. Your bone density is 4 times standard human norms. Your muscle fibers are. I don't even have a classification for this structure." Guilliman remained still on the reinforced examination table. The normal biobed had nearly collapsed under his weight, and allowed the physician his fascination. The doctor was competent, curious, and most importantly discreet. Archer had cleared the medical bay of all but essential personnel, which suggested the captain understood the potential complications of having a 3-meter transhuman warrior aboard his ship. "My people adapted to survive," Guilliman repeated, maintaining his cover story with the ease of someone who had spent centuries navigating political necessities. "Hostile environment. Aggressive xenos species. Limited resources. We modified our genome over generations." "Generations?" T'Pol stood near the doorway, her tricorder active, her skepticism evident despite her Vulcan emotional control. "Commander, these modifications represent technology centuries beyond Earth's current capabilities. Genetic engineering of this sophistication would require computational models, laboratory facilities, and an understanding of human DNA that Earth scientists only achieved within the last decade." "Perhaps your Earth," Guilliman said carefully. "My colony had different priorities. Different pressures. Necessity accelerates innovation, Commander." "What was the name of your colony?" T'Pol asked, and Guilliman recognized the interrogation technique, simple questions designed to trap inconsistencies. He had interrogated thousands of traitors and xenos in his centuries of service. He knew every variation of this dance. "We called it Macridge," he said, choosing the name with deliberate irony. "After the ancient Terran word for Mother's Grace. We believed Terra, Earth, had abandoned us. We were wrong, it seems." Archer leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Guilliman with the careful attention of a commander assessing a potential threat. "How long has your colony been isolated?" "By our records? Approximately 4,000 years. The number hung in the air like a detonation. Trip, who had been examining the armor of fate with increasingly bewildered fascination, actually stopped mid-scan and turned. 4,000 years? The engineer said. That had put your colony's departure at. Wait, that's before Earth even had warp capability. Before we had space flight at all. Slower than light generation ships. Guilliman improvised, drawing on his knowledge of ancient Terran history. Sleeper colonies. Your ancestors launched hundreds of them, did they not? Before they discovered faster methods of travel? Paul's eyes narrowed fractionally. Earth launched 14 sleeper ships between 2078 and 2123. All were accounted for. None traveled far enough or long enough to produce a culture with your level of technological advancement. Perhaps your records are incomplete, Guilliman suggested. Or perhaps my ancestors were better at hiding than yours were at tracking. Or perhaps you're lying, T'Pol said flatly. The room tensed. Malcolm Reed's hand drifted toward his phase pistol. The two Makos flanking the door shifted their stances subtly, preparing for potential combat. Guilliman smiled. A slight expression that didn't reach his eyes. I admire your directness, Commander. Very logical. Yes, I am withholding information. No, I am not lying about being human or about my colony facing Xeno's threats. But the complete truth of my origins would create complications. What kind of complications? Archer asked, his voice level but his posture subtly shifting into a more confrontational stance. The kind where you would feel obligated to contain me, Guilliman said simply. To study me. To prevent me from accessing your systems or influencing your crew. You would see me as a threat rather than a resource, and we would waste time and energy on mutual suspicion when we could be learning from each other. Learning what exactly? Reed demanded. Guilliman's gaze fixed on the tactical officer with the intensity of a predator assessing prey. How you've survived this long while being so catastrophically unprepared for real warfare. The bluntness of the statement struck like a physical blow. Archer straightened, his jaw tightening. Excuse me? Your ship, Guilliman said, gesturing to encompass the Enterprise. I've observed your crew, your equipment, your defensive posture. Your explorers. Scientists. Diplomats. Admirable pursuits. But you're operating in hostile space with weapons that would barely scratch a proper military vessel, shields that failed against the spatial anomalies in the region where you found me, and a crew trained primarily for first contact protocols rather than sustained combat. We just survived the Shindy crisis, Tripp said, his southern accent sharpening with defensive pride. We saved Earth from being destroyed. I'd say we know a thing or two about combat. You survived through luck, determination, and heroism, Guilliman acknowledged. I don't doubt your courage. But courage without preparation is simply a slower form of suicide. Tell me, Captain, when you encountered the Shindy weapon, did you have contingency plans? Multiple strategic options? Reserve forces? No. You had one ship, one crew, and one desperate mission. You succeeded because your enemies underestimated you and because fortune favored the bold. But fortune is fickle, Captain Archer. And the next threat you face may not be so generous. Silence fell across the medical bay. Phlox had stopped his scans, listening with uncomfortable attention. Paula's expression remained neutral, but her fingers had stilled on her tricorder. Archer took 3 steps forward, bringing himself within arm's reach of the seated Primarch. Close enough to be either confrontational or conversational, depending on how the moment resolved. You've been awake for less than 2 hours, the captain said quietly. And you think you understand our capabilities? I understand warfare, Guilliman replied. I've studied it my entire life. I've commanded forces numbering in the millions across campaigns that span decades. I've defended worlds against enemies that would make your Shindy seem like primitive raiders. And I recognize when warriors are being led by commanders trained for peacetime exploration. Starfleet isn't a military organization, Archer said. We're explorers. Which is why you'll die when you encounter an enemy who views exploration as weakness. Guilliman interrupted. Captain, I mean no disrespect. Your mission is noble. Your ideals are admirable. But ideals don't deflect plasma fire, and exploration doesn't win battles against species that view you as prey. Reed spoke up, his tactical instincts engaged despite his obvious distrust. What would you do differently? Guilliman gestured toward the door. Your Makos. Military Assault Command operations, I believe? They're positioned defensively, watching me, but their firing lanes cross each other. If I attacked, which I won't, their own crossfire would endanger each other. Their weapons are holstered for quick draw, but in close quarters against an armored opponent, they'd need sustained fire. They should be positioned at angles, with overlapping fields of fire that don't intersect. The Makos exchanged glances, uncomfortable with being so precisely analyzed. Your security stations throughout the ship. Guilliman continued. I observed them during transport to medical. They're centralized hubs, efficient for coordinating responses but vulnerable to single-point failures. A saboteur could disable your security network by targeting 3, perhaps for critical junctions. How could you possibly know our security layout? Reed demanded. Because it follows the most logical design for a ship of this configuration, Guilliman said. Which means your enemies can predict it as easily as I can. Logic is valuable, Lieutenant, but predictability is fatal. T'Pol stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her suspicion. You claim to have commanded millions. What kind of colony requires armies of such size? The kind surrounded by enemies, Guilliman said. The kind that learns survival requires strength, vigilance, and the willingness to strike first when necessary. Preemptive warfare, T'Pol said with unmistakable disapproval. Ethically questionable at best. Ethics are a luxury afforded by strength, Guilliman countered. When you're weak, when you're vulnerable, when your enemies view negotiation as opportunity for attack rather than resolution, ethics become complicated. Tell me, Commander, what would you do if a hostile species announced their intention to exterminate your people? Would you wait for them to strike first? Would you attempt diplomacy while they armed their fleets? Or would you act to preserve your civilization? We would exhaust all diplomatic options, T'Pol said firmly. And if diplomacy failed? If your enemies rejected every overture, viewed every gesture of peace as weakness to exploit? Then we would defend ourselves, Archer said. But we wouldn't strike first. Why not? Guilliman asked genuinely. If you know the attack is inevitable, if you have intelligence confirming hostile intent, if waiting means fighting from a disadvantageous position, why handicap yourself with arbitrary rules about who fires first? Because those rules are what separate us from our enemies, Archer said with quiet intensity. Because the moment we start thinking like conquerors, we become what we're fighting against. Guilliman studied the captain with new respect. Here was a man who understood the philosophical stakes, even if Guilliman disagreed with his conclusions. The Primarch had spent centuries navigating the Imperium's brutal pragmatism, enforcing the Emperor's will through force and faith. But he'd also built Ultramar into a functioning civilization, created the Codex Astartes to prevent the kind of tyranny that had led to the Horus heresy. He understood the value of principles. He simply believed they needed to be backed by overwhelming force. An admirable position, Captain, Guilliman said. Truly. But I've watched civilizations fall because they clung to principles while their enemies clung to victory. I've seen worlds burn because their defenders waited for permission to act until it was too late. Your ideals are beautiful. I hope your strength proves sufficient to preserve them. Tripp cleared his throat, breaking the tension. So, Mr. Guilliman, what exactly were you doing drifting in space? You said you were pursuing enemies? Guilliman nodded slowly, choosing his next words with care. My people discovered a corruption. A philosophical virus, you might call it. Zealots who believed humanity's survival required submission to forces they couldn't control. They fled through an experimental portal, dimensional technology we barely understood. I pursued them. The portal collapsed. I survived. They didn't. All true in the broadest sense. The word-bearers were zealots. The warp breach was dimensional. Guilliman had pursued them. Lying by omission came naturally to someone who'd spent centuries managing an empire built on necessary deceptions. Dimensional technology? Tripp's eyes lit up with engineering fascination. Like what we encountered in the Expanse? The subspace corridors and spatial anomalies? Similar principles, I suspect, Guilliman said. Though far more controlled. Or it should have been. Obviously, something went catastrophically wrong. Phlox approached with his medical scanner, his expression troubled. Mr. Guilliman, I'm concerned about your armor. It appears to be integrated with your nervous system at a level that suggests removal would be traumatic. Perhaps fatal. The armor and I are bonded, Guilliman confirmed. It responds to my thoughts, maintains my biology, and has kept me alive in environments that would kill any unaugmented human in seconds. I've lived in it for a very long time. Can it be removed at all? Phlox asked. Yes. But not here. Not without facilities specifically designed for Astartes-grade equipment maintenance. The term slipped out before Guilliman could stop it. Astartes? T'Pol repeated, her tricorder immediately active. That term appears nowhere in our linguistic databases. An old word from my colony, Guilliman said smoothly. It means armored warrior in our dialect. We developed our own language over the generations. Isolation breeds linguistic drift. Paula's expression suggested she didn't believe him, but she filed the information away rather than pressing the point. Archer made a decision visible in the shift of his posture from confrontational to cautiously welcoming. Dr. Phlox, continue your examinations but give Mr. Guilliman some space. He's not a prisoner. Yet, Reed muttered. And we'll treat him as a guest unless he gives us reason to do otherwise. Archer looked directly at Guilliman. We'll help you figure out where you are and how to contact your people. In the meantime, you're welcome aboard the Enterprise. But I need to know, are you a threat to my crew? Guilliman met his gaze steadily. Not unless you give me reason to be, Captain. I seek only to understand where I am, and perhaps, to help. Help how? Archer asked. That, Guilliman said, standing slowly to his full imposing height, depends on what threats you face. And whether you're willing to accept help from someone whose methods may challenge your comfortable assumptions about how civilized beings wage war. The Primarch extended his hand again, the ancient Terran gesture of alliance, of mutual respect between warriors. I propose a bargain, Captain Archer. I'll share what I know of strategy, tactics, and survival. You'll share what you know of this galaxy, its politics, and its dangers. And together, we'll determine whether my presence here is fortune or catastrophe. Archer hesitated only a moment before clasping the massive gauntlet hand. Deal, the captain said. But Guilliman? If you betray that trust, if you endanger my crew, I don't care how big you are or how advanced your armor is. We'll find a way to stop you. Guilliman smiled, a genuine expression this time, appreciating the captain's courage in threatening a demigod to his face. I would expect nothing less, Captain. A commander who won't protect his people isn't worthy of command. As the crew dispersed and Phlox continued his fascinated medical documentation, Roboute Guilliman began the next phase of his assessment. These humans were idealistic, naive, and catastrophically unprepared for the realities of galactic conflict. But they had courage, intelligence, and most importantly, they had survived this long despite their weaknesses. Perhaps there was hope for them after all. Perhaps he could guide them towards strength without crushing what made them worthy of preservation. Or perhaps he would watch them die beautifully, clinging to principles while the galaxy burned around them. Time would tell. The mess hall fell silent when Roboute Guilliman entered. It wasn't just his size. Though at 3 meters tall in full armor, he had to duck through the doorway and turn sideways to navigate between tables. It wasn't just the ornate ceramite plating that caught the overhead lights and gleamed with an otherness that spoke of technologies no one aboard Enterprise fully understood. It was the presence itself. The way every instinct recognized something fundamentally different about the armored giant, selecting reconstituted protein and vegetables with movements too precise, too controlled for something that massive. Commander Tucker had invited him to share a meal with the senior staff, a gesture of hospitality that Guilliman recognized as both diplomatic courtesy and intelligence gathering. He'd accepted, curious to observe these humans in their natural social environment, away from the formality of the bridge or medical bay. Now, seated at a table reinforced hastily by Tripp's engineering team, Guilliman carefully lifted a fork between thumb and forefinger, the utensil comically small in his gauntlet hand, and attempted what passed for normal dining aboard a 22nd century Earth starship. You don't have to eat if the armor makes it difficult, Tripp offered, his own meal forgotten as he watched with engineering fascination. I mean, how do you even? Guilliman's helmet retracted with a soft hiss of pneumatics, folding back into the armor's collar assembly in a sequence of perfectly machined movements. The senior staff froze. The face revealed was handsome in an unsettling way, too perfect, too symmetrical, like a classical sculpture given life. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, piercing blue eyes that held centuries of experience despite skin that appeared no older than 40. Short dark hair, neatly maintained. But it was the expression that captured attention, intelligence, calculation, and something almost sad lurking beneath the surface. The armor incorporates nutrient recycling, Guilliman explained, his natural voice deeper and more resonant than even the Vox speakers suggested. But I appreciate the opportunity to taste actual food. It's been some time. He took a careful bite, chewed thoughtfully, and made a face that would have been comical if not for the inherent dignity he maintained even while expressing mild disgust. Reconstituted protein, Travis Mayweather said with a sympathetic grin. Yeah, it takes getting used to. We had similar rations during extended campaigns, Guilliman said diplomatically. Nutritionally complete. Culinarily disappointing. Hoshi Sato laughed, the first person to relax slightly in his presence. You fought campaigns? What kind of military did your colony have? The kind necessary for survival, Guilliman said, setting down his fork and leaning back carefully, the reinforced chair creaking under his weight. When I was created, my people faced extinction. Multiple hostile Xenos species had established territorial dominance in our region of space. Humanity was considered prey. Livestock. Sometimes entertainment. Paul's eyebrow rose. Created? Guilliman cursed internally, another slip. His cover story required careful maintenance, and these humans were more perceptive than he'd initially credited. Genetically engineered, he clarified. My generation was designed specifically to lead humanity's military forces. Enhanced strength, intelligence, reaction time. We were weapons, Commander T'Pol, built by desperate scientists who understood that conventional soldiers couldn't match our enemy's natural advantages. That's morally problematic, T'Pol observed. Creating sentient beings for the sole purpose of warfare. Survival is rarely morally simple, Guilliman countered. Would you prefer my people had maintained ethical purity while being systematically exterminated? Sometimes the choice isn't between right and wrong, Commander. It's between two wrongs, and you choose the one that keeps your species alive. Malcolm Reed leaned forward, his tactical mind engaged. These Xeno species you fought, what were they like? Guilliman considered his answer carefully. He couldn't describe orcs, tyrannids, or chaos without revealing too much. But he could draw parallels to threats these Enterprise crew might understand. Varied, he said. Some were simple predators, warrior cultures that valued conquest above all else. Imagine your Klingon, but without honor codes or restraint. Pure aggression, technologically sophisticated, and utterly convinced of their racial superiority. The Klingon have honor, Reed objected. From what little I've learned, yes, Guilliman agreed. Which makes them preferable to the Xenos I've faced. At least honor provides predictability. Rules of engagement. Common ground for negotiation, however limited. The species that attacked Makridge viewed negotiation as weakness. Surrender as invitation for creative execution. Mercy as incomprehensible. Sounds like the Shindy, Tripp said quietly, and several crew members shifted uncomfortably at the mention. Guilliman noted their reactions, trauma, recent and deep. The ones who attacked your Earth? Archer nodded, his expression hardening. They built a weapon. Tried to destroy our entire planet. Killed 7 million people in a test firing. And you stopped them, Guilliman said. How? We found them, Archer said simply. Traveled into the Delphic Expanse, the region where you were found. Made allies. Fought battles. Eventually convinced some of the Shindy species that humanity wasn't their enemy. Convinced them? Guilliman's interest sharpened. You negotiated with species actively trying to commit genocide against your homeworld? 3 of the 5 Shindy species were being manipulated, T'Pol explained. By transdimensional beings who feared humanity's future expansion. Once we exposed the deception, those species became our allies in stopping the weapon. Guilliman sat back, genuinely impressed despite his skepticism. Remarkable. You converted enemies into allies through diplomacy while under active threat of extinction. That requires either extraordinary courage or extraordinary desperation. Both, Tripp said with a tired smile. Definitely both. And did this diplomatic approach cost you nothing? Guilliman asked quietly. No compromises? No sacrifices? No moments where you had to choose between your principles and your survival? The silence that fell across the table answered more eloquently than words. Archer's voice was steady but his eyes haunted. We did what we had to do. Sometimes that meant crossing lines we'd sworn we'd never cross. Sometimes it meant making choices that kept us awake at night. But we never lost sight of who we were. Who we wanted to be. A difficult balance. Guilliman acknowledged. I've commanded forces for longer than you've been alive, Captain, and I still struggle with that question. When does pragmatism become atrocity? When does necessary force become tyranny? When does protecting your people justify the methods you employ? You sound like you've had to make those choices, Hoshi said softly. More times than I can count, Guilliman admitted. I've ordered bombardments that killed millions to prevent billions from falling to corruption. I've executed surrendering enemies because allowing them to live would endanger future generations. I've built an empire on the foundation of absolute force because I believed, still believe, that strength is the only currency the galaxy truly respects. The crew exchanged uncomfortable glances. Paula's expression remained neutral, but her fingers had stilled on her PADD. And do you regret those choices? Archer asked. Guilliman met his gaze steadily. Some of them. Others, I'd make again without hesitation. Regret is a luxury, Captain. The dead don't care whether I feel guilty. They care whether the civilization I preserved in their name survives another generation. That's a bleak philosophy. Mayweather observed. It's a pragmatic one. Guilliman corrected. I don't enjoy warfare, Ensign. I don't take pleasure in necessary atrocities. But I refuse to allow my discomfort with difficult choices to paralyze me into inaction while my people die around me. The conversation was interrupted by the mess hall doors opening. Commander Shran entered, an Andorian liaison officer temporarily assigned to Enterprise as part of the growing Earth-Andoria alliance. His antennae perked forward aggressively as he spotted Guilliman, and his hand drifted instinctively toward his Ushantor blade. So this is the giant the whole ship is whispering about, Shran said, his voice carrying that distinctive Andorian edge between curiosity and challenge. 3 meters tall, wears armor that could survive a photon torpedo, and claims to be from a human colony nobody's ever heard of. Guilliman stood slowly, his full height forcing Shran to look up despite the Andorian's own considerable stature. The two warriors assessed each other with the instant recognition of kindred spirits. Soldiers evaluating potential threats and potential allies simultaneously. Commander Shran, Archer said quickly, sensing the potential for confrontation. This is Roboute Guilliman. Guilliman, Commander Shran of the Andorian Imperial Guard. Imperial Guard, Guilliman repeated, genuine interest in his tone. A military designation. Your people value martial prowess? We value honor, strength, and the will to defend what's ours, Shran said, circling the table to get a better view of Guilliman's armor. Unlike some species who prefer endless debate while their enemies sharpen their knives. Paula's expression suggested she'd heard this argument before and found it tiresome. A philosophy I understand, Guilliman said, and something in his tone made Shran's antennae rise with surprised approval. Though I've learned that strength without strategy is simply enthusiastic suicide. Shran laughed, a sharp, genuine sound. I like this one, Archer. Finally, someone aboard this ship who understands that the galaxy doesn't respect weakness. The galaxy respects many things, T'Pol countered. Logic, scientific advancement, cultural exchange. Which are all easier to pursue when backed by sufficient military force to discourage aggression. Guilliman interjected smoothly. The commander isn't wrong, T'Pol. Ideally, strength and wisdom work in concert. Force without thought creates tyrants. Thought without force creates victims. Shran pulled up a chair, his combative posture shifting to something more collaborative. Tell me about your colony's military structure. You said you commanded millions? During the largest campaigns, yes, Guilliman confirmed. We organized our forces into legions, self-sufficient military units capable of independent operation across multiple theaters. Each legion specialized in different warfare doctrines. Siege warfare, rapid deployment, asymmetric operations, void combat. Void combat? Reed's tactical interest was fully engaged now. Space warfare? Extensively, Guilliman said. When you control multiple worlds, space becomes the ultimate strategic high ground. We developed doctrines for everything from planetary bombardment to boarding actions to fleet engagements across distances measuring millions of kilometers. Trip leaned forward, his engineering mind racing. Your armor, it's designed for vacuum operation, isn't it? That's why it's so completely sealed. You could fight in space without a ship. For limited durations, yes, Guilliman confirmed. Though I prefer having a ship. Even enhanced physiology has limits. What kind of ships did your people build? Trip asked eagerly. Guilliman smiled slightly, remembering the glorious vessels of the Imperium's fleet. Large ones. We learned that in void combat, mass and firepower matter more than maneuverability in most engagement scenarios. Our battle barges could carry entire legions and had weapons capable of reducing continents to molten slag. The table fell silent at that casual mention of civilization-ending firepower. You're talking about weapons of mass destruction, T'Pol said carefully. I'm talking about weapons appropriate to the threats we face, Guilliman corrected. When your enemies field similar firepower, anything less is unilateral disarmament. Admirable in principle, fatal in practice. Shran nodded appreciatively. The Andorian Guard understands this. We've fought too many wars against enemies who respected only strength. The Vulcans like to pretend logic solves everything. Logic combined with adequate defensive capabilities has preserved Vulcan civilization for millennia. T'Pol interrupted. But even they maintain a military. Shran finished. They just pretend it's for exploration and scientific defense. Guilliman studied the dynamic between the Andorian and Vulcan with fascination. Here were two allied species with fundamentally different philosophies, maintaining cooperation despite obvious friction. In the Imperium, such differences would be resolved through clear hierarchy and forced compliance. But these people maintained their distinct identities while working toward common goals. It was inefficient, messy, politically complicated. It was also more resilient than homogeneous culture, he realized. When one approach failed, alternative perspectives provided backup options. When one species' weaknesses were exposed, allied species could compensate. Perhaps there was strategic value in diversity after all. Not the naive acceptance of all species regardless of threat, but the calculated alliance of compatible civilizations with complementary strengths. You're thinking, Archer observed. What about? About how your alliance structure creates redundancy, Guilliman admitted. Human creativity and adaptability, Vulcan logic and scientific method, Andorian martial prowess and tactical aggression. Each species compensates for the other's weaknesses. It's surprisingly efficient, once you look past the obvious friction. High praise from someone who thinks we're catastrophically unprepared, Reed said dryly. You are catastrophically unprepared, Guilliman agreed without malice. But you're learning. Adapting. The Shindy crisis taught you that the galaxy contains threats diplomacy cannot resolve. Now you're building alliances with species who can help you face those threats. It's the beginning of strategic thinking. The beginning? Shran's antennae tilted forward challengingly. The Andorian Guard has been fighting wars since before your colony's ancestors left Earth. And yet, Guilliman said mildly, your species remains confined to a relatively small region of space, constantly engaged in territorial disputes with neighbors, burning resources on conflicts that benefit no one. Tactical excellence without strategic vision, Commander. You win battles but not wars. Shran's hand moved toward his blade, his ice blue skin darkening with anger. You dare! Commander, Archer said sharply. Guilliman raised a placating hand. I meant no insult. Your warriors are formidable, I don't doubt that. But formidable warriors led by short-sighted politicians tend to achieve glorious deaths rather than lasting victories. It's a pattern I've seen repeated across countless civilizations. And I suppose your colony achieved lasting victories? T'Pol asked skeptically. We survived, Guilliman said simply. We transformed from prey species to apex predator. We built a civilization that spanned multiple worlds and held territory against enemies who outnumbered us, outgunned us, and wanted nothing more than our complete extermination. Yes, Commander T'Pol. I would call that a lasting victory. At what cost? She asked quietly. Guilliman's expression darkened. Everything we were. Everything we wanted to be. We became monsters to fight monsters, and by the time we won, we barely recognized ourselves. But we were alive to have that crisis of conscience. The alternative was noble extinction. The mess hall had fallen completely silent now, other crew members abandoning any pretense of their own conversations to listen to the armored giant's words. So what would you do differently? Archer asked. If you were advising our alliance. What did you call it? Strategic vision? Guilliman considered the question carefully, aware that his answer would define how these people viewed him. As potential ally or inevitable enemy. I would consolidate, he said finally. Earth, Vulcan, and Doria Tellar, you're building something unprecedented. A multi-species alliance based on mutual benefit rather than conquest. It's admirable. But it's also fragile. You need formal structure. Unified command. Shared military doctrine. A single governmental framework that preserves each species' autonomy while presenting a unified front to external threats. A federation. Hoshi breathed, and Guilliman noted how the words seemed to resonate with several crew members. If you wish to call it that, Guilliman agreed. But whatever you call it, it needs teeth. Exploration is valuable. Scientific advancement is necessary. Cultural exchange is enriching. But none of that matters if you can't defend it. And right now you can't. Not against determined aggression from a unified enemy. The Romulans, Reed said quietly. Guilliman's enhanced hearing had caught scattered references to that name over the past hours. Tell me about them. The senior staff exchanged glances, and Archer made a decision visible in the straightening of his shoulders. They're a threat, the captain said carefully. We haven't seen them directly. They use remotely piloted ships, hide behind cloaking devices. But they've been testing our borders, probing our defenses. Intelligence suggests they're building towards something. Maybe war. Then war is inevitable, Guilliman said flatly. Species that probe defenses are species preparing to exploit weaknesses. The question isn't whether they'll attack. It's whether you'll be ready when they do. And how do we get ready? Shran demanded. Abandon our principles? Become conquerors ourselves? You preserve your principles by becoming strong enough that no one can force you to compromise them, Guilliman said. The Imperium, my people, learned that lesson in blood. Strength doesn't require cruelty. Power doesn't demand tyranny. But weakness invites predation. And if you're not strong enough to protect what you value, someone else will take it from you and destroy it simply because they can. He stood, his armor catching the overhead lights as he prepared to leave. I'm not your enemy, Guilliman said, addressing the entire mess hall now. I don't know if I'm your ally yet. That depends on whether you're willing to accept hard truths from someone whose methods challenge your comfortable assumptions. But I am human. And whatever else I am, whatever I've become, I want humanity to survive. To thrive. To reach its potential. He looked at Archer directly. Whether that potential lies in your idealistic federation or in something harder, something forged in the fire of necessary war, that remains to be seen. But I'm willing to help you find out. If you'll let me. The Primarch walked toward the exit, then paused at the doorway and looked back. One final thought, Captain. The Romulans are testing you because they don't know what you are yet. Prey or predator. Victim or threat. How you respond to their next provocation will determine whether you face invasion or respect. Choose wisely. As the armored giant departed, leaving the mess hall in thoughtful silence, Commander Shran turned to Archer with his antennae fully forward. I don't trust him, the Andorian said. But by the icy gates, I respect him. That's a warrior, Archer. A real one. And he's right about the Romulans. Paula's expression remained neutral, but her fingers moved across her PADD with unusual intensity. His physiological readings continued to defy explanation, she said quietly. And his knowledge of military strategy is far more sophisticated than any isolated colony should possess. He's hiding something, Captain. Something significant. I know, Archer said, watching the doorway where Guilliman had disappeared. But he's also offering help we might desperately need. The question is whether we can accept it without compromising who we are. Or whether we can afford not to, Reed added grimly. In his temporary quarters, a cargo bay hastily converted and structurally reinforced, Roboute Guilliman stood before the viewport, gazing at the stars of an unfamiliar galaxy. He had lied about his origins, concealed his true nature, manipulated these good people into seeing him as a potential ally rather than the walking apocalypse he truly was. And yet, watching their earnest debates, their genuine struggle to balance principles with pragmatism, their determination to build something better than simple conquest, he felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries. Hope. Perhaps these humans, uncorrupted by the Imperium's necessary cruelties, could build something worth preserving. Perhaps this was his chance to guide humanity down a different path. Not the Emperor's path of absolute dominion, but something better. Or perhaps he would watch them fall to the same harsh realities that had forged the Imperium, and learn that some lessons could only be taught in blood. The communications array lit up with urgent priority signals 3 days after Guilliman's arrival. Captain Archer reached the bridge within 90 seconds of the alert, still fastening his uniform jacket as the turbolift doors opened. Report, he ordered, moving to his command chair. Long-range sensors are detecting weapons fire, Travis Mayweather said from the helm, his voice tight with tension. Bearing 321 Mark 5. Distance 4 light years. Can you identify the combatants? Archer asked. Paula's fingers flew across her science station. Negative. The engagement is occurring near the edge of sensor range. However, the energy signatures are consistent with disruptor weaponry, and something else. High-energy plasma discharge of unknown origin. One of the vessels is hailing on all frequencies. Hoshi reported. Audio only. It's badly distorted, but I'm getting fragments. They're asking for assistance. Put it through. The bridge speakers crackled with static-laced desperation. Under attack, coordinates. Anyone receiving. Romulan warbids. Colony transport Saratoga. Civilian evacuation. Children aboard, please. The message dissolved into interference, then repeated on a loop. Archer's jaw tightened. Civilian transport under Romulan attack. Travis set course. Maximum warp. Captain, T'Pol said carefully. We are not equipped for engagement with multiple Romulan warbids. Our tactical analysis of previous encounters suggests. I heard the analysis, Commander. Archer interrupted. I also heard children aboard. We're going. Malcolm, ready all weapons. Trip, I need every bit of power you can give me. You'll have it, Captain. Trip's voice came through the comm from engineering. The turbolift doors opened again. Roboute Guilliman stepped onto the bridge, fully armored, the Emperor's sword mag-locked to his back. Every head turned. I heard the alert, the Primarch said simply, moving to stand beside Archer's chair with surprising grace for something so massive. You're engaging Romulan forces? Civilian rescue, Archer confirmed. Multiple attackers against an unarmed transport. Tactically disadvantageous, Guilliman observed, his eyes already scanning the tactical displays. But morally necessary. I approve, Captain. How many warbids? Unknown, Reed reported from tactical. Sensor interference from the weapon's fire is making accurate counts difficult. Then assume the worst-case scenario, Guilliman said. 3 to 4 vessels, experienced commanders, superior firepower. They'll be using cloaking devices, which means they can maneuver without your sensors tracking them. Your advantage is surprise. They won't expect a Starfleet vessel to intervene. How do you know about cloaking devices? T'Pol asked sharply. Because any species with spatial warfare capabilities and a preference for ambush tactics would develop them, Guilliman said. It's not complex technology, light-bending fields, sensor scattering arrays. We face similar systems from Xeno's raiders. The key is compensating for what you can't see. Archer studied the Primarch carefully. You've fought against cloaked enemies before. Extensively. I can help if you'll permit me. I don't suppose you'd be willing to wait in your quarters while we handle this? Archer said, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Would you, Captain, if you possessed knowledge that could save lives? Guilliman countered. Archer made his decision. Malcolm, what's your assessment? Reed's professionalism overcame his distrust. If he's fought cloaked opponents successfully, I want to hear his tactics. We're about to go into a fight we're not equipped for. I'll take any advantage we can get. 30 seconds to weapons range, Mayweather announced. Drop from warp on my mark, Archer ordered. Malcolm, polarize hull plating. Hoshi, open a channel to the Saratoga. Let them know help is coming. The Enterprise dropped from warp into chaos. The view screen showed a civilian transport, barely larger than Enterprise herself, venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches, her engines dark, drifting helplessly. Green disruptor fire lanced through space from seemingly empty coordinates, each impact tearing new wounds in the transport's hull. 2 warbids decloaking, Reed shouted. Bearing 180 Mark III and 045 Mark VI. The Romulan vessels shimmered into visibility, predatory and elegant, their design suggesting avian hunters frozen in mid-strike. Disruptor banks glowed with building charges. Evasive maneuvers, Archer commanded. Guilliman's hand shot out, gripping the back of Archer's chair, not restraining, but emphasizing. No. Hold position between the transport and the warbids. Make them choose between targets. That makes us a shield, Reed protested. We'll take the full brunt. Exactly, Guilliman interrupted. They want the transport destroyed. You're forcing them to waste time and ammunition on you first. Every second they shoot at Enterprise is another second the civilians might survive. It's called threat prioritization, Lieutenant. Make yourself the greater danger. Archer hesitated for only a heartbeat. Travis, position us between the Saratoga and those warbids. Malcolm, return fire. Target the closer vessel. Enterprise surged forward, placing her hull directly in the line of fire. Disruptor blasts hammered into the polarized plating, causing the deck to shudder violently. Phase cannons returned fire, orange beams lancing toward the nearest warbird. Minimal damage to their shields. Reed reported grimly. Our weapons aren't penetrating effectively. Because you're dispersing fire across their entire shield envelope, Guilliman observed, studying the tactical display with the practiced eye of someone who'd commanded fleet actions. Concentrate fire on a single shield facing. Overload it. Their shields are stronger than yours, but they're not infinite. That gives the second warbird free shots at us, Reed countered. Yes. Which means you need to end the first engagement quickly. Guilliman pointed at the tactical screen. There. Their starboard shield generator. I can see the energy distribution pattern from here. Hit that location with everything you have. Reed looked to Archer, who nodded sharply. All phase cannons, concentrate fire on coordinates 193 Mark 7. The tactical officer ordered. Photonic torpedoes, same target. Fire. Enterprise's weapons converged on a single point. The Romulan warbird shields flared brilliant green, holding. Then collapsing in a cascade of energy discharge. The follow-up torpedo impacted bare hull, tearing through the warbird's wing section. Direct hit! Reed shouted with fierce satisfaction. They're venting plasma. The second warbird is breaking off, T'Pol reported. Cloaking device activating. No, Guilliman said sharply. They're repositioning. Assuming you can't track them while cloaked, can you? Negative, T'Pol confirmed. Cloaking technology scatters our sensor beams. Then they'll come from an unexpected angle. Probably from below your current orientation, targeting your ventral sections where your phase cannons have limited firing arcs. Guilliman's tactical prediction came with complete confidence. Rotate the ship. Present your dorsal surface downward. When they decloak, and they will, to fire, you'll have clear shots. Archer didn't question the advice. Travis, rotate 90 degrees along the z-axis. Malcolm, ready weapons for ventral approach. Captain, I'm receiving another transmission, Hoshi interrupted. It's from the lead Romulan vessel. Audio only, as expected. Let's hear it. A voice emerged from the speakers, proud, cold, speaking accented English with unmistakable command authority. Starfleet vessel. You have interfered in Romulan affairs. Withdraw immediately or share the fate of the criminals you defend. Criminals? Archer stood, anger flashing across his face. That's a civilian transport with families aboard. They violated our territorial space. They stole resources that belong to the Romulan Star Empire. Justice is being administered. Guilliman stepped forward, his massive form dominating the viewscreen's reflection. Captain, may I? Archer hesitated, then gestured permission. Romulan Commander, Guilliman said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone accustomed to command on galactic scales. I am Roboute Guilliman. I speak for humanity's interests. Your vessels are damaged. You face a Starfleet crew prepared to defend those under their protection. Your tactical position is compromised. I offer you one opportunity to withdraw with honor intact. Reject it, and I will personally ensure your ships become debris fields marking the coordinates where Romulan arrogance met human resolve. Silence filled the bridge. The crew stared at Guilliman with expressions ranging from shock to admiration to horror at the naked threat delivered with such casual certainty. The Romulan response came with barely controlled fury. You dare threaten the Star Empire? Your primitive vessel is no match for Romulan warbirds. We will. Your second warbird is decloaking, Reed interrupted. Bearing exactly as predicted, 270 Mark -45. Fire! Archer ordered. Enterprise's phase cannons caught the Romulan vessel mid-materialization, shields still forming. The warbird twisted desperately, trying to evade, but Mayweather had already adjusted the Enterprise's position based on Guilliman's prediction. Torpedoes impacted the warbird's engineering section, and secondary explosions bloomed across its hull. They're retreating, T'Pol reported. Both vessels entering warp. Pursuit is not recommended given our current damage. Archer exhaled slowly, adrenaline gradually releasing its grip. Damage report. Hull plating at 60%, Reed said. Minor casualties in sections 7 and 12. Nothing critical. Captain, we won. We survived, Guilliman corrected quietly. Winning would have required destroying both vessels. They'll return with reinforcements and better tactics. You've made an enemy today, Captain Archer. The Romulans won't forget this interference. I can live with that, Archer said firmly. Hoshi, open a channel to the Saratoga. The view screen shifted to show the transport's bridge, damaged, smoke-filled, but still functioning. A woman in civilian clothes appeared, her face streaked with soot and relief. Starfleet vessel, This is Captain Maria Estrella of the Saratoga. I don't know how you found us, but thank you. We have 83 civilians aboard, including 27 children. We're venting atmosphere from 7 compartments and our engines are offline, but we're alive. Stand by, Captain Estrella, Archer said. We're sending repair teams. What happened? We were evacuating a research station in what we thought was neutral territory, Estrella explained. The Romulans appeared without warning, claimed we'd violated their space, and opened fire when we tried to explain. They didn't even give us a chance to surrender. Guilliman's expression darkened. The transport of civilians. Classic pretext for territorial expansion. They wanted witnesses eliminated, then would claim you'd never been there. No survivors, no evidence, no diplomatic complications. That's a bold accusation, T'Pol said. It's standard Imperial strategy, Guilliman countered. I've seen it employed dozens of times. The Romulans are testing boundaries, both spatial and moral. Today they learned that Starfleet won't abandon civilians even when tactically disadvantageous. They'll adjust their tactics accordingly. Tripp's voice came through the calm. Captain, I can have repair teams on the Saratoga within 10 minutes. But we're gonna need to tow her to the nearest starbase. Her warp core is completely shot. Do it, Archer ordered. And Tripp? Good work down there keeping the engines running under fire. Thank the walking tank on your bridge, Tripp said. His shield concentration tactic bought us the time we needed. As the crew moved into rescue and repair operations, Guilliman stood at the viewport, watching the damaged transport with an expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been something darker. Commander Shran arrived on the bridge, summoned by the combat alert. His antennae tilted forward aggressively as he took in the aftermath. I heard we bloodied some Romulan noses. Wish I'd been here for it. You would have enjoyed the Primarch's tactics, Reed said, and there was new respect in the tactical officer's voice. Aggressive, precise, effective. He called every Romulan move before they made it. Shran approached Guilliman, circling him with warrior's appraisal. You've fought Romulans before. Don't try to deny it, your predictions were too accurate. Not Romulans specifically, Guilliman said carefully. But species with similar tactical doctrines. Ambush predators who rely on technological superiority and surprise. The fundamentals of void combat remain consistent across cultures. Establish firing solutions, deny enemy firing solutions, concentrate force on vulnerable points. The rest is simply execution. Simply, T'Pol repeated skeptically. Guilliman turned to face Archer directly. Captain, you need to understand what happened here today. The Romulans tested you. They attacked civilians to see if Starfleet would risk engagement. You passed their test by demonstrating both capability and will. But the test itself reveals their strategic thinking. Which is? Archer prompted. They're preparing for war, Guilliman said flatly. Not today, perhaps not this year. But they're mapping your responses, identifying weaknesses, establishing patterns they can exploit. Every encounter with Starfleet vessels teaches them more about your capabilities and limitations. They're building a tactical profile. Then we're building one of them, Reed countered. Are you? Guilliman challenged. What have you learned? That they use cloaking devices, which you already knew. That their disruptors are more powerful than your phase cannons, which you already knew. That they're willing to attack civilian targets, which you already knew. Meanwhile, they've learned your engagement protocols, your weapon ranges, your shield strength, your maneuvering characteristics, and most importantly, your moral boundaries. The bridge fell silent as the implication settled. They know you'll defend civilians even when outnumbered, Guilliman continued. That's admirable. It's also exploitable. Next time, they'll use civilian targets as bait, draw you into ambushes, force you to choose between tactical wisdom and moral obligation. And you'll choose morality every time because that's who you are. Which makes you predictable. And predictability is fatal. So what would you do? Archer asked, frustration edging his voice. Abandon civilians to avoid being predictable? No, Guilliman said simply. I would make my predictability a weapon. If the enemy knows you'll defend civilians, use that knowledge against them. Set your own ambushes. Position forces near likely targets. Turn their tactical assumptions into traps. Be predictable in principle but unpredictable in execution. Shran's antennae rose with approval. Strategic deception. Make them think they understand you, then surprise them with the method. Exactly, Guilliman confirmed. Your principles are strengths, Captain Archer. But only if you're smart about how you apply them. Courage without cunning is just slow martyrdom. Archer considered the Primarch for a long moment. You know a lot about warfare for someone from an isolated colony. I told you, Guilliman said. My people faced extinction. We learned fast or we died. Every tactical principle I know was purchased with blood and failure. I'm simply trying to spare you the same learning curve. Or you're a Romulan agent providing intelligence to undermine Starfleet. T'Pol said bluntly. Guilliman actually smiled at that, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. If I were a Romulan agent, Commander, I would have let those warbids destroy Enterprise. Instead, I helped you win a battle you should have lost. If that's espionage, your enemies need better training. She has a point though, Reed said carefully. Your knowledge is suspiciously comprehensive. I've been honest about my background, Guilliman said, which was technically true in the most misleading possible way. I'm from a human colony that fought for survival against hostile Xenos. That experience taught me tactics your species hasn't needed yet. Whether you trust me or not, Captain, the results speak for themselves. Those civilians are alive because you listened to someone with more combat experience than your entire command structure combined. It was arrogant. It was accurate. And it was precisely the kind of statement that made everyone on the bridge simultaneously respect and distrust him. Archer made his decision visible in the straightening of his posture. Mr. Guilliman, I'd like you to sit in on our tactical briefings. Share what you know about asymmetric warfare, ambush tactics, and fighting against superior forces. Malcolm, coordinate with him. T'Pol, continue your analysis of his claims. Commander Shran, I want your assessment of his tactical advice from a military perspective. Already agree with most of it, Shran said immediately. The Andorian Guard uses similar doctrines. Concentrated fire, unpredictable timing, turning enemy assumptions into vulnerabilities. He fights like someone who's actually won battles instead of simulating them. That's what concerns me, T'Pol said quietly. As the bridge crew dispersed to their duties, Guilliman remained at the viewport, watching the rescue operation with satisfaction. He had proven his value. Demonstrated that his presence aboard Enterprise provided tangible benefits. These humans would come to rely on his tactical expertise, gradually incorporating his teachings into their doctrines. And when the Romulan War inevitably came, as he knew it must, as history recorded it would, they would be stronger for his influence. Strong enough to win without becoming monsters. Strong enough to preserve their principles while still surviving the brutal realities of galactic conflict. Or so he hoped. Behind him, Archer and T'Pol spoke in low tones, their voices carrying to his enhanced hearing despite their attempt at privacy. He's manipulating us, T'Pol said. Providing just enough assistance to make himself invaluable while concealing his true origins and motivations. I know, Archer replied. But he saved lives today, T'Pol. Whatever else he is, whatever he's hiding, he helped us protect civilians from execution. That counts for something. The question is what it counts toward, T'Pol observed. His own agenda, or genuine assistance? Maybe both, Archer said. Maybe that's the best we can hope for. Guilliman smiled to himself, unseen in the reflection of the viewport. Perhaps these humans were smarter than he'd initially credited. Good. They would need that intelligence for what was coming. The training facility on Enterprise was never designed for what Commander Shran proposed. You want to do what? Major Hayes of the Makos stared at the Andorian commander, as if he'd suggested decompressing the cargo bay for entertainment. Combat training, Shran repeated, his antennae tilted forward with unmistakable eagerness. Your Makos against the Primarch. Hand-to-hand, weapons optional, full contact. I want to see what 3 meters of engineered warrior can actually do. That's insane, Hayes said flatly. He's twice our size, probably 3 times our strength, wearing armor that could stop a photon torpedo. Which is exactly why your people need to train against him, Shran interrupted. When have your Makos ever faced an opponent with overwhelming physical advantages? The next time you encounter hostile species with superior strength or size, you'll freeze because you've only trained against humans. Guilliman stood in the corner of the briefing room, arms crossed, listening with quiet amusement. The commander makes a valid point, Major. Your soldiers are skilled by human standards. But the galaxy contains threats that don't fight by human parameters. Hayes looked at Guilliman with the wary respect of a professional soldier assessing a superior force. With respect, sir, my people aren't expendable training dummies. I don't want dummies, Guilliman said. I want warriors willing to learn how to fight enemies stronger, faster, and better equipped than themselves. I'll hold back enough to avoid permanent injury, but this needs to be real enough to matter. Pain teaches lessons that simulation cannot. Captain Archer approved this? Hayes asked skeptically. He said, and I quote, if the Makos are willing and Dr. Phlox is standing by. I won't stop consenting adults from beating the hell out of each other. Shran reported with evident satisfaction. So, are your Makos willing? Hayes considered for exactly 3 seconds. When do we start? 20 minutes later, the cargo bay had been cleared and reinforced. Dr. Phlox stood by with medical equipment, his expression somewhere between professional concern and scientific fascination. Captain Archer, Commander Tucker, and Lieutenant Reed watched from an observation platform. T'Pol had declined to attend, calling it an inefficient use of resources, though Guilliman suspected she simply disapproved on principle. Guilliman stood in the center of the bay, having removed the armor of fate's outer plating, a process that took 15 minutes and revealed the black body glove beneath, form-fitting and clearly reinforced but far less intimidating than full ceramite plate. Even without armor, his physique was inhuman. Dense muscle moving under pale skin marked with old scars, proportions slightly wrong for baseline humanity. Just the body glove? Hayes asked, reassessing his tactical approach. No armor at all? The armor would make this pointless, Guilliman said. You need to learn how to fight superior opponents, not how to bruise your knuckles on ceramite. The body glove provides minimal protection, enough that it won't bleed from every strike, but not enough to make your attacks ineffective. He gestured to the Emperor's sword, carefully secured against the far wall. I'll also fight unarmed. Your people can use training weapons if they choose. Generous of you, Shran observed from the sidelines. Practical, Guilliman corrected. A warrior who can only fight with overwhelming advantages is simply a bully with expensive equipment. 6 Makos entered the training area, Hayes among them. They'd selected stun batons and combat knives, not lethal but potentially incapacitating if used correctly. They spread out, establishing a perimeter around Guilliman with professional discipline. Rules? Hayes asked. Don't permanently maim me, I won't permanently maim you, Guilliman said. Beyond that, fight to win. Treat this as life or death, because the enemies you'll face won't give you the courtesy of practice rounds. All 6 at once? One of the Makos asked. Unless you think you need more, Guilliman said mildly. Hayes made a sharp hand gesture. The Makos moved. They were good, Guilliman acknowledged that immediately. Coordinated, disciplined, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously to divide his attention. Stun batons crackling with electrical charge thrust toward vital points while knife wielders tried to flank and hamstring. Guilliman moved. It wasn't the blur of motion that Astartes could achieve, but it was far faster than baseline human capabilities. He sidestepped the first baton strike with minimal movement, caught the wielder's wrist in one massive hand, and used the Mako's own momentum to throw him into two of his companions. The soldiers collided in a tangle of limbs and dropped weapons. A knife swept toward Guilliman's kidney from behind. He twisted, the blade scoring across his body glove without penetrating, and backhanded the attacker with carefully measured force, enough to send the man sprawling but not enough to break bones. Probably. You're thinking like humans fighting a human, Guilliman said, not even breathing hard as he evaded another coordinated assault. Bigger human, yes, but fundamentally the same fight. Wrong approach. I'm not human by your parameters. I'm the Xeno species that's stronger, faster, and more experienced. Adapt. Hayes rolled to his feet, analyzing, adjusting. He made another hand signal, more complex this time. The Makos shifted tactics, no longer trying to match Guilliman's reach but focusing on mobility, creating openings, forcing him to divide attention across too many threats simultaneously. Better. Guilliman nodded approval even as he caught another stun baton mid-thrust, crushed the weapon in his grip until circuits sparked and died, then shoved the wielder backward hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. Good, he said. You're learning. Don't fight my fight. Fight yours. Use speed, terrain, coordination. Make me react to you instead of you reacting to me. A Mako tried to sweep Guilliman's leg, ambitious against someone with his mass and balance, but showing creativity. Guilliman allowed it to partially succeed, shifting his weight and appearing to stumble. Two Makos immediately pressed the advantage, thinking they'd found an opening. It was a trap. Guilliman's stumble transformed into a controlled drop, one leg sweeping out in a circle that caught both attackers and sent them crashing down. He was back on his feet before they hit the deck, and his counterattack came with brutal efficiency. Precise strikes to nerve clusters that would hurt tremendously but cause no lasting damage. Stop! Hayes called, breathing hard. Guilliman immediately froze, stepping back with hands raised peacefully. The Makos regrouped, bruised and winded but eyes bright with adrenaline and analysis. None were seriously injured. Guilliman's control had been perfect, but all were thoroughly defeated. Comments? Guilliman asked. You're faster than you look, one Mako said, rubbing his ribs. You fight like you can see the future, another added. Every time we tried something, you were already countering. Pattern recognition, Guilliman explained. I've fought thousands of combats against tens of thousands of opponents. Your species has limited biomechanical options for movement. I can predict your attacks based on stance, weight distribution, eye movement, and muscle tension. It's not precognition. It's experience. How do we counter that? Hayes asked, professional interest overriding pride. Become unpredictable, Guilliman said. Train techniques that violate normal human movement patterns. Sacrifice efficiency for surprise. Use weapons and environments in unconventional ways. Make me guess instead of know. He gestured to the scattered Makos. But most importantly, understand this, you will never beat an opponent like me in single combat. Accept that. Your advantage is numbers, coordination, and tactics. 6 of you working together with perfect synchronization might overwhelm me through accumulated damage and divided attention. 6 of you fighting as individuals will always lose. Shran's antennae tilted forward thoughtfully. The Andorian Guard trains in chain fighting. Linked combatants who move as one organism, each protecting the other's vulnerabilities. Show me, Guilliman said immediately. What followed was a demonstration that captured everyone's attention. Shran called down 3 Andorian soldiers from his temporary delegation. They'd been watching from the observation deck, and they entered the training area with their Ashantor mining picks. These are Shral, Thras, and Keval, Shran introduced. They trained together at the Imperial Guard Academy. They fight together. Watch. The 3 Andorians formed a triangle, their antennae oriented toward each other, and began moving through combat forms. It was immediately clear this was something different. They didn't just coordinate, they flowed. Each Andorian's movements complemented the others, creating a defensive perimeter that rotated and shifted seamlessly. Where one attacked, another defended. Where one retreated, another advanced. They were 3 warriors functioning as a single 6-limbed organism. Beautiful! Guilliman breathed, genuine appreciation in his voice. That's not just training. That's cultural integration of combat into fundamental identity. Andorians evolved in ice caves fighting underground predators. Shran explained. Chain fighting developed because individual warriors couldn't survive alone. The group is stronger than the sum of parts. Test it against me, Guilliman suggested. The 3 Andorians exchanged glances with their commander, received his nod of permission, and immediately shifted into combat stance. This was harder. They moved with inhuman coordination, their antennae providing spatial awareness that let them track Guilliman without looking directly at him. When he feinted left, all 3 adjusted simultaneously. When he tried to separate one from the group, the other 2 immediately reinforced. Their Ushantor strikes came from unexpected angles, probing for weaknesses in his defense. Guilliman found himself actually exerting effort. Not enough to truly threaten him, his experience and strength still provided overwhelming advantages, but enough that he had to think, predict, adapt. Excellent, he said, deflecting a strike that would have caught a slower opponent in the throat. This is what coordinated combat looks like. The Makos should study this. He proved his point by demonstrating a counter-tactic, focusing all attention on one Andorian while ignoring the others entirely. The targeted warrior's chain partners immediately moved to defend him, which created the opening Guilliman had manufactured. He swept through the gap, disrupting their formation, and the carefully maintained triangle collapsed. And that's how you defeat chain fighting, Guilliman explained, helping the Andorians back to their feet with surprising gentleness. Find the warrior they're most protective of, usually the youngest or least experienced. Threaten him so aggressively that the others break formation to save him. Once the chain breaks, exploit the gaps. Shran's antennae tilted back thoughtfully. You've fought Andorians before. No, Guilliman said honestly. But I've fought species with similar pack-bonding tactics. The principles remain consistent across cultures. Loyalty is a strength until it becomes a predictable vulnerability. From the observation deck, Tucker leaned toward Archer. Captain, he just defeated 9 trained soldiers without breaking a sweat. And he was teaching the whole time. That's terrifying and impressive simultaneously. That's the problem, Archer said quietly. He's clearly valuable. But what's he getting out of this? Why teach our people to fight better? Maybe he's lonely, Tucker suggested. I mean, think about it. He's from a colony where everyone was engineered for war. Now he's surrounded by people he sees as weak. Maybe training us makes him feel useful, connected. Or maybe he's building a private army. Reed countered. Teaching them his tactics, his philosophy. Making them dependent on his expertise. Archer didn't have an answer for that. On the training floor, Guilliman addressed the assembled Makos and Andorians. Your species, humans, Andorians, Vulcans, all of you, have evolved for your specific environments and challenges. You're not weak. You're adapted. But the galaxy contains threats adapted for different purposes. Species engineered for combat. Species that evolved as apex predators. Species that view warfare as natural as breathing. He gestured to the Emperor's sword against the wall. I was created to fight such threats. Built from genetic foundation to be stronger, faster, more durable than baseline humans. Trained from earliest memory in every form of warfare known to my civilization. Given equipment that amplifies those advantages to overwhelming levels. I am, by any reasonable measure, a weapon that thinks. The brutal honesty silenced the room. But weapons are only as valuable as their purpose. Guilliman continued. I cannot return to my people. I may never see my home again. So I must choose, what purpose will I serve here? I could conquer, you couldn't stop me. I could destroy, your weapons are insufficient against me. I could rule through fear. Your people would eventually submit. He met each soldier's eyes in turn. If you choose weakness, if you choose to remain vulnerable out of principle, that's your right. I'll simply grieve for the potential wasted. And if we're attacked while you're here? If the Romulans come back with more ships? Then I'll fight beside you. Guilliman said simply. Not because I command you, not because you've sworn loyalty to me, but because we share a common enemy and a common humanity. That's enough. Archer studied the Primarch for a long moment, searching for deception and finding only complicated sincerity. I'm trusting you, the captain said finally. Not completely. Not blindly. But enough to let you continue this training. Don't make me regret it. I'll try not to, Guilliman said. Though I suspect we'll both regret some aspects of this arrangement before we're finished. The question is whether the benefits outweigh the costs. As Archer departed, Guilliman stood alone in the cargo bay, feeling the ache of bruises he'd allowed the soldiers to land, minor injuries he could have avoided but had accepted to make the training meaningful for them. He was teaching humans to fight like the Astra Militarum, training them in tactics refined across 10,000 years of galactic warfare, shaping them, slowly and carefully, into something stronger than they were. And with every lesson, every tactical principle shared, every moment of hard-won wisdom passed from his experience to their eager minds, he wondered. Was he saving them from future threats? Or creating the very thing he'd warned them about, an army trained in the brutal doctrines of the Imperium, ready to wage the kind of total war that had consumed his galaxy? Time would tell. But either way, they would be ready. The conference chamber on Starbase 12 was designed for diplomatic negotiations, not confrontations between philosophical worldviews. Representatives from Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, and Tellar had gathered to discuss the proposed coalition charter, the foundational document that would formalize their alliance into something more permanent. Roboute Guilliman had not been invited. He attended anyway. This is a closed session, Ambassador Soval of Vulcan stated flatly as the armored giant entered the chamber, his ceramite plating barely clearing the doorframe. Captain Archer, why is your passenger here? Because Captain Archer invited me, Guilliman said before Archer could respond. And because what you're discussing here will determine whether your species survive the next 50 years or become cautionary tales told by whatever civilization conquers your ruins. The room erupted in protest. Ambassador Thoris of Tellar, a squat, porcine species with a reputation for argumentative diplomacy, stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. The arrogance! Thoris sputtered. You claim to be from some isolated colony, yet you presume to lecture the representatives of 4 space-faring civilizations on our survival? Yes, Guilliman said simply, taking position at the end of the conference table despite the lack of a chair that could support his weight. Because I've watched civilizations fall. I've studied the patterns of collapse. And I recognize the warning signs in everything you're building here. Warning signs? Minister T'Pau of Vulcan, an older woman whose reputation for logical analysis was legendary, steepled her fingers thoughtfully. Elaborate. Guilliman gestured to the draft charter displayed on the central view screen. You're attempting to build a multi-species alliance based on mutual respect, scientific cooperation, and shared governance. Admirable in principle. Structurally fragile in practice. The Vulcan Science Academy has modeled dozens of governmental frameworks, T'Pau countered. This coalition structure provides maximum autonomy for member worlds while enabling coordinated response to mutual threats. It provides maximum opportunity for paralysis through disagreement, Guilliman corrected. You've created a system where unanimous consent is required for military action, where each species maintains independent armed forces under independent command, where territorial disputes must be resolved through committees and arbitration. Tell me, Minister, when the Romulans attack in force, how long will your deliberations take? How many ships will burn while you debate the logical response? The Romulans have not demonstrated hostile intent sufficient to justify preemptive militarization, Soval stated. Guilliman's laugh was sharp and humorless. Ambassador, 3 days ago they attacked a civilian transport carrying children. They've been probing your borders for months. Intelligence reports, which I've reviewed with Captain Archer's permission, indicate increased military production in Romulan space. They've cancelled diplomatic meetings, refused trade negotiations, and reinforced their side of the neutral zone. By what measure do these actions not demonstrate hostile intent? Defensive preparations are not equivalent to offensive planning, Sovo argued. They're identical until the first shot is fired, Guilliman countered. And by then, the species that prepared for peace while their enemies prepared for war is already losing. Shran, attending as Andoria's military liaison, leaned forward with evident satisfaction. The Primarch speaks truth. The Andorian Imperial Guard has fought 3 wars in the last century because we mistook enemy preparations for defensive posturing. We learned to recognize the signs. The Andorian solution to every problem is military force, Ambassador Thoris said dismissively. We are attempting to build something better. A coalition based on reason, not violence. I don't oppose reason, Guilliman said, his tone shifting to something more measured. I oppose the naive assumption that reason alone can protect you from species that view your commitment to peaceful resolution as exploitable weakness. You can build a civilization based on logic and cooperation. I encourage it. But you must also build that civilization strong enough that enemies choose negotiation over invasion. Minister Topor regarded Guilliman with penetrating analysis. You advocate for a militarized federation. Standing armies, coordinated fleets, unified command structure. This would fundamentally alter the charter we are proposing. I advocate for a federation capable of survival, Guilliman clarified. Your charter currently treats military force as a regrettable necessity to be minimized and constrained. I suggest treating it as a fundamental requirement to be properly developed and strategically deployed. The difference seems subtle but becomes critical when your worlds are under siege. Vulcan has maintained peace for centuries through diplomacy and logical negotiation, Topaz said. Vulcan has maintained peace because you possess sufficient military force to make war against you unprofitable, Guilliman corrected. Your high command maintains a fleet. Your planetary defense grid could repel most conventional attacks. You negotiate from a position of strength, which your logic recognizes as superior to negotiating from vulnerability. I'm simply suggesting you extend that same pragmatic approach to your coalition. The argument continued for 3 hours. Guilliman, to the surprise of many attendees, proved capable of diplomatic discourse when he chose. He cited historical precedents from Earth's own past, the failures of the League of Nations, the initial weaknesses of the United Nations, the collapse of defensive pacts that lacked enforcement mechanisms. Guilliman pulled up a modified version of the charter he'd been drafting during the previous nights, sleep being something he required far less than baseline humans. Unified Defense Force, he began. Not replacing independent fleets, but augmenting them. A rapid response armada with ships from all member species, trained in coordinated tactics, commanded by rotating leadership from member worlds. Think of it as your coalition's sword. Kept sharp, kept ready, deployed only when necessary but available immediately. He highlighted another section. Streamlined emergency protocols. If any member world is attacked, automatic defense pact activation. No debates, no committees. Attack one, attack all. Your enemies need to know that striking any coalition member triggers immediate, overwhelming response from all coalition forces. That could drag peaceful members into conflicts not of their choosing, Tapa observed. Yes, Guilliman agreed. Which means your enemies must carefully consider whether any target is worth making enemies of your entire coalition. That's called deterrence, Minister. It prevents wars by making the cost of starting them unacceptably high. He moved to another section. Mandatory military minimums. Each member species maintains fleet strength proportional to their industrial capacity and population. No more, no less. This prevents both excessive militarization and dangerous underpreparedness. your weakest member becomes strong enough to defend themselves. Your strongest members can't dominate through overwhelming force. Shran's antennae perked forward with interest. Proportional strength requirements. That addresses Teller's concerns about dominant species while ensuring everyone contributes meaningfully. It also requires significant military investment, Thoris pointed out. Resources that could fund scientific research, infrastructure development, quality of life improvements. Resources that will be irrelevant when your infrastructure is rubble and your scientists are corpses, Guilliman said bluntly. I'm not suggesting you become a warrior culture ambassador. I'm suggesting you maintain sufficient strength that you never need to use it. Peace through strength. It's not a new concept. The debate raged on, but Guilliman noted with satisfaction that the attendees were now arguing about implementation details rather than fundamental principles. He'd shifted the conversation. During another recess, Minister T'Pau approached Guilliman privately. You argue with the passion of someone who has experienced the consequences of inadequate preparation, she observed. I've buried worlds, Minister, Guilliman said quietly. Civilizations that believed their principles would protect them. Populations that thought their enemies would respect their pacifism. I've walked through the ruins of beautiful cities destroyed because their builders trusted in reason while their enemies trusted in firepower. And you believe our coalition is destined for similar failure? I believe your coalition has potential, Guilliman said carefully. You're building something genuinely new, cooperation between species without conquest or submission. It's admirable. But potential means nothing if you don't survive long enough to realize it. The Romulans are watching. Assessing. The moment they believe you're weak, they'll strike. And if you're not ready, all your beautiful principles will become epitaphs on mass graves. T'Pau studied him with penetrating intensity. You speak from experience that your supposed colonial origin cannot explain. Your tactical knowledge, your historical references, your understanding of interspecies politics, these suggest exposure to galactic-scale conflicts over extended periods. Yet you claim to be from an isolated human colony. I claim to be from a colony that faced extinction and adapted to survive. Guilliman corrected. The methods of that adaptation are complicated. You are lying, T'Pau stated flatly. Not about your intentions, perhaps, but about your origins. Yes, Guilliman admitted, surprising her with his honesty. I am withholding significant information about where I come from and how I came to be here. But everything I've told you about the dangers you face is true. Everything I've recommended about strengthening your coalition serves your interests, not mine. Judge me by my actions and advice, Minister, not by the origins I cannot fully reveal. Why can you not reveal them? Because the truth would make you see me as a threat rather than an ally, Guilliman said simply. And right now, you need allies more than you need complete transparency about someone trying to help you survive. T'Pau considered this for a long moment. An interesting logical proposition. Beneficial deception versus harmful truth. Captain Archer trusts you, despite recognizing your deceptions. Commander Shran respects your tactical expertise. Even Ambassador Soval, though he would deny it, finds your arguments difficult to refute. You have built provisional trust through demonstrated competence. Is there a question in that observation, Minister? Are you a threat to the coalition? T'Pau asked directly. Not unless the coalition becomes something that threatens humanity, or the principles I believe worth preserving, Guilliman answered with equal directness. I want you to succeed, Minister T'Pau. I want to see if diverse species can build something better than conquest and domination. I want to believe that cooperation can work. But I refuse to watch you fail because you're too principled to defend yourselves properly. A conditional alliance, then. The only honest kind, Guilliman said. The final session of the conference arrived at a compromise that satisfied no one completely, which Guilliman recognized as the mark of genuine negotiation. The charter would include provisions for a coalition defense force, but with significant oversight and limitations. Emergency protocols would be streamlined, but not eliminated entirely. Military minimums would be recommended but not mandated. It was a half measure, a cautious step toward the unified strength Guilliman believed necessary. But it was a step. As the ambassadors prepared to depart, Ambassador Soval approached Guilliman with characteristic Vulcan directness. "Your proposals were logically sound," the ambassador admitted. "But implementing them would fundamentally alter the coalition's character. We would become more militant, more prepared for conflict. This risks becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. We prepare for war, our enemies interpret our preparations as hostile intent, and war becomes inevitable." "That's a valid concern," Guilliman acknowledged. "But consider the alternative. You remain unprepared, your enemies interpret your weakness as opportunity, and war comes anyway, except you lose because you weren't ready. At least prepared civilizations can choose whether to use their strength. Unprepared civilizations have no choices at all. The Vulcan approach has traditionally been to develop sufficient defensive capability while avoiding provocative offensive preparations," Soval explained. "And if the Romulans decide your defensive capabilities are insufficient deterrent?" Guilliman challenged. "If they calculate they can win before your defenses inflict unacceptable losses? Defensive preparations only prevent war if your enemies believe your defense cannot be overcome. Otherwise, you're simply making invasion more challenging, not impossible." Soval's eyebrow rose fractionally. "You argue that defense and offense are functionally equivalent in deterrence calculation." "I argue that credible defense requires offensive capabilities," Guilliman clarified. "An enemy fortification that can only defend itself is a target. An enemy fortification that can defend itself and launch devastating counterattacks is a deterrent. The Romulans need to know that attacking Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, or Tellar means facing not just offensive resistance but offensive retaliation. That's what prevents wars, Ambassador. Not good intentions. Not diplomatic protocols. Fear of consequences. A cynical philosophy," Soval observed. "A pragmatic one," Guilliman corrected. "I don't enjoy it, Ambassador. I don't take pleasure in the necessity of violence. But I've watched idealistic civilizations die while cynical civilizations survived. And given the choice between being right and being alive, I choose survival. You can judge me for that." "I do not judge," Soval said. "I observe. And I observe that despite your deceptions and your concerning origins, you have consistently acted to strengthen rather than undermine the coalition. This suggests either genuine alignment of interests or exceptionally sophisticated long-term manipulation." "Can it be both?" Guilliman asked with slight amusement. "Perhaps I genuinely want you to survive and am willing to manipulate you toward that survival when you're too stubborn to accept help directly. An honest manipulation," Soval said dryly. "Fascinating contradiction." As the conference concluded and the delegates departed, Captain Archer found Guilliman standing before the viewport, watching the various species ships undock and depart in different directions. "You caused quite a stir," Archer observed. "I told uncomfortable truths to people who preferred comfortable illusions," Guilliman said. "It's never popular. Do you really think the Romulans will attack?" "Yes," Guilliman said without hesitation. "Not today, not this year. But soon. They're measuring you, learning your capabilities, identifying vulnerabilities. Every encounter teaches them more. Eventually, they'll decide they've learned enough and they're ready. And when that day comes, Captain, you'll be grateful for every defensive measure, every trained soldier, every unified protocol you established beforehand. And if you're wrong? If your cynicism creates the very conflict you predict?" Guilliman turned to face Archer directly. "Then I'll accept responsibility for that mistake and help you end the war I helped start. But Captain, I've made many mistakes across my very long life. Excessive caution has never been one of them. Every civilization I've seen destroyed, every world I've failed to save, they all fell because they weren't prepared enough, not because they were too ready." Archer considered the Primarch's words, then made a decision visible in his posture. "Starfleet Command wants to meet you," the captain said. Formally. They've heard about your tactical advice, your training sessions with the Makos, your contributions at this conference. Admiral Forrest specifically requested you attend a briefing on Romulan threat assessment. And you're concerned they'll ask questions I can't answer honestly. Guilliman observed. I'm concerned they'll ask questions you'll answer too honestly. Archer corrected. You've been careful with me, with my crew. But admirals don't have the same patience for evasion. They'll want to know exactly who you are, where you're from, and what your ultimate agenda is. Guilliman smiled slightly. Then I'll tell them what I've told you, Captain. I'm someone trying to help humanity survive in a galaxy that views us as irrelevant at best and prey at worst. Whether they believe me or not, whether they trust me or not, that's their choice. But I'll keep offering my expertise regardless, because the alternative is watching preventable deaths while I possess knowledge that could save lives. Even if they order you confined? Studied? Contained as a potential threat? They can try, Guilliman said quietly. But I'd prefer they didn't force that confrontation. I'm trying very hard to be an ally, Captain Archer. I hope your superiors are wise enough to accept one when he's offered. As Enterprise prepared to return to Earth, carrying the armored giant toward meetings that would determine whether humanity's leadership viewed him as asset or threat, Roboute Guilliman stood in his quarters and composed a message he would never send. It was addressed to the Emperor of Mankind, 10,000 years and an impossible dimensional gulf away. Father Asterisk. I find myself in a place where humanity is young, idealistic, and catastrophically unprepared for the realities of galactic politics. They build alliances with Xenos. They debate morality while enemies prepare for war. They believe reason and principle can protect them from species that respect only force. Asterisk. They remind me of what we were, before the Unification Wars. Before the Great Crusade. Before we learned that survival requires strength and strength requires sacrifice. Asterisk. I'm trying to teach them without destroying what makes them worth saving. Trying to preserve their idealism while building the foundations of power that will let that idealism survive contact with reality. Asterisk. I don't know if it's possible. But I have to try. Asterisk. Your son, asterisk. Guilliman, asterisk. He deleted the message unsent, as he had every night since his arrival. Some conversations could only happen across impossible distances. Some prayers could only be offered into silence. But the work continued regardless. The Orion Syndicate operated in the shadows between legitimate commerce and outright piracy, trafficking in everything from dilithium to sentient beings. Their neutrality was purchased through bribes, their operations protected by carefully maintained networks of compromised officials and strategic blackmail. Commander T'Pol had spent 3 weeks tracking the syndicate cell responsible for abducting colonists from the Federation border worlds. Her investigation had identified a likely transfer point, a supposedly abandoned trading station in unclaimed space where merchandise changed hands before being sold to the highest bidder. What she hadn't anticipated was walking into a trap. Enterprise received her distress call 19 hours after her undercover shuttle failed to report in. The message was fragmentary, heavily encrypted, transmitted in a brief burst before jamming cut it off, asterisk compromised. Station Epsilon Theta. Syndicate knows. Request immediate, asterisk. Then silence. Captain Archer stood on the bridge, rage and calculation warring across his features. How many are we facing? The station appears minimally crude, Hoshi reported. Maybe 20 life signs total. But I'm also detecting 3 Orion patrol ships docked at the station. Small vessels, lightly armed, but they could still cause problems. And T'Pol? Trip asked, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. 1 Vulcan life sign, isolated in what appears to be the station's detention area, Hoshi confirmed. Guilliman stood at the rear of the bridge, arms crossed, observing with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen variations of this scenario across countless worlds. It's a trap, he said quietly. Obviously, Malcolm Reed replied, not taking his eyes off his tactical console. They know she's Starfleet. They're using her as bait to draw us in. And we're going anyway, Archer stated, not a question. Of course, Reed agreed. She's crew. Guilliman stepped forward, his armor's bulk seeming to fill the bridge despite its size. Captain, if I may. This is precisely the scenario I warned about, your predictability being weaponized against you. They know you'll come for her. They've prepared accordingly. So we should abandon her? Tripp's voice rose with anger. I didn't say that, Guilliman corrected calmly. I said they've prepared for you to come. The question is whether you'll arrive the way they expect, or whether you'll surprise them. Archer turned to face the Primarch fully. What are you suggesting? Let me go in first, Guilliman said. Alone. The Orions have prepared for a Starfleet rescue, phase cannons, transporters, by-the-book tactical approach. They haven't prepared for a 3-meter transhuman warrior who doesn't follow your protocols. Absolutely not, Reed objected. We're not sending someone in alone against unknown opposition. Why not? Guilliman asked. I'm far more capable of solo infiltration than any team you could assemble. I can survive in vacuum without life support for extended periods. My armor provides protection against most directed energy weapons. I'm strong enough to breach sealed doors and fast enough to clear rooms before defenders can coordinate responses. Send me in as advance reconnaissance. I'll secure T'Pol and create enough chaos that your rescue team can extract her safely. You're proposing a one-man assault on a fortified position, Archer said slowly. I'm proposing I do what I was designed for, Guilliman replied. I'm a weapon, Captain. A very expensive, very sophisticated weapon built specifically for scenarios where conventional tactics fail. Use me accordingly. Shran, who had been listening from the communications station where he was liaising with Andorian intelligence, stepped forward. The Primarch has a point. The Orions won't expect solo assault. Their defenses will be positioned for ship-to-ship engagement and team infiltration. One warrior hitting them from an unexpected vector could disrupt their entire defensive posture. Or get himself killed, Tripp argued. Unlikely, Guilliman said with complete confidence. I've conducted solo operations against far more dangerous enemies in far more hostile environments. These are slavers and merchants with delusions of military competence. I'll be fine. Archer looked at his senior officers, reading their expressions. Reed was skeptical but intrigued. Tripp was worried but desperate. Hoshi looked frightened at the prospect but hopeful. Shran was openly approving. What's your plan? Archer asked. Guilliman moved to the tactical display, his gauntlet fingers manipulating the controls with surprising delicacy. Enterprise approaches as expected, hailing frequencies open, requesting permission to dock, playing by Starfleet's diplomatic rules. While you're negotiating, you launch me in an unpowered EVA trajectory from your cargo bay. No engine signature, no transporter trace. Just an armored object drifting on ballistic course toward the station's blind spot. He highlighted a section of the station's outer hull. Their sensors will be focused on your ship, watching for weapons lock and transporter activity. They won't notice one more piece of debris in an already cluttered approach vector. I reach the hull here. Minimal shielding. Appears to be a service access point. I breach, infiltrate, locate T'Pol, and extract her to a position where your transporters can lock on. And if they detect you? Reed challenged. Then they panic. Guilliman said simply. Panicked enemies make mistakes. I'll use the chaos to accomplish the mission regardless. You're talking about boarding a hostile station alone, fighting through trained combatants, and rescuing a prisoner from a secured detention area, Archer said. That's suicide for a normal person. Good thing I'm not a normal person, Guilliman replied. The decision took Archer less than 10 seconds. Do it. But Guilliman, you bring her back alive, or you don't come back at all. Understood? Understood, Captain, Guilliman said, already moving toward the turbolift. And Captain? When I signal, you'll have approximately 90 seconds to get transporter lock and extract. The Orions won't stay confused longer than that. Don't waste time with protocols. Just get her out. 20 minutes later, Roboute Guilliman stood in the cargo bay airlock, the Emperor's sword maglocked to his back, armor systems running final diagnostics. Trip had insisted on personally checking the seals, ensuring the armor of fate could handle extended vacuum exposure. Your armor's reading green across the board, Trip reported, though his expression remained worried. But Guilliman, you'll be out there for at least 15 minutes before you reach the station. No support, no backup, no communication once you launch. If something goes wrong, then I'll adapt, Guilliman said. Commander Tucker, I appreciate your concern. But I've conducted orbital insertions in far worse conditions than this. I'll be fine. You keep saying that, Trip muttered. But you're still just one person. I'm the genetic inheritor of the Emperor's vision, enhanced beyond human limits, trained in warfare since before your grandfather was born, and equipped with technology your species won't develop for centuries, Guilliman said quietly. I'm not just anything, Commander. I'm exactly what this situation requires. The airlock cycled. Guilliman stepped into the void. Space embraced him with familiar cold. His armor's systems adjusted instantly, sealing all atmospheric ports, activating secondary oxygen reserves, engaging thermal regulation to prevent heat loss. The Enterprise dwindled behind him, continuing its approach to the station, while his unpowered trajectory carried him on a carefully calculated ballistic arc. Silence. Complete, profound silence. No Vox communications, no tactical updates, no supporting fire. Just Guilliman, the stars, and the distant station growing larger in his vision. It reminded him of the Great Crusade's early days, when Primarchs personally led boarding actions against Xeno's vessels, before the Imperium's bureaucracy made such actions politically complicated. He'd missed this, the clarity of solo operation, the simplicity of violence unencumbered by command responsibility. The station rotated slowly, its superstructure marked by makeshift repairs and jury-rigged additions that spoke of decades operating on the margins of legitimate space. Guilliman identified his target, a maintenance hatch partially obscured by cargo containers, exactly where the schematics indicated minimal security coverage. He reached the hull in absolute silence, magnetic boots engaging with gentle precision. The hatch was sealed but not locked. Overconfidence or oversight, either way, it was exploitable. Guilliman's armored fingers found the manual release, applied pressure that would have been impossible for baseline humans, and felt the mechanism yield. The hatch swung open. Atmosphere vented briefly before emergency seals engaged. Guilliman pulled himself inside, sealing the hatch behind him and standing in what appeared to be a storage corridor. Dusty, poorly lit, exactly the kind of space that lazy security ignored. He activated his armor's internal Vox on encrypted frequency. Guilliman to Enterprise. I'm aboard. Beginning infiltration. Archer's voice came back immediately. Copy that. We're still negotiating with Station Command. They're demanding we maintain distance and submit to inspection before allowing docking. Classic delaying tactic. Delay them longer, Guilliman suggested. I need time to reach the detention area. He moved through the corridor with predatory silence, his enhanced hearing tracking conversations and movement patterns throughout the station. The Orions had positioned guards at major intersections, 6 here, 4 there, concentrating force at choke points where they expected Starfleet teams to advance. They'd left the maintenance corridors largely unguarded. Sloppy. Guilliman followed the architectural logic toward the station's core, where detention facilities would be located, centralized, secured, away from hull breaches. He encountered his first guard purely by accident. An Orion male emerging from a side passage, carrying a datapad and looking bored. The guard's eyes widened at the impossible sight of an armored giant materializing from the shadows. His mouth opened to shout a warning. Guilliman's hand closed around the Orion's throat, lifting him off his feet with casual strength. "Where is the Vulcan prisoner?" The guard struggled, choking, unable to breathe, much less answer. Guilliman loosened his grip fractionally. "Detention, level 3. Central block." The Orion gasped. "Thank you," Guilliman said, and applied precise pressure to the carotid artery. The guard went limp, unconscious, not dead. Guilliman had killed more sentients than he could count across his centuries of service, but there was no tactical benefit to killing this one. He dragged the unconscious Orion into a storage closet and sealed the door. Level 3. He found an access shaft. Maintenance tunnel designed for automated systems, far too small for normal humans but manageable for someone with Primarch physiology willing to crawl. Guilliman compressed himself into the shaft and began moving with controlled speed, armor scraping against metal with sounds he hoped the station's ambient noise would mask. He emerged 2 levels down, directly adjacent to the detention block. Now came the complicated part. The detention area had 6 guards visible. Well-armed Orions carrying disruptor rifles, positioned with clear firing lanes. The cell block itself was behind a reinforced door requiring biometric authentication. Security cameras covered every approach. Subtlety was no longer an option. Guilliman drew the Emperor's sword. The weapon hummed to life, golden energy crackling along its blade, power that existed partially in real space and partially in dimensions these people didn't understand. It had been forged to destroy demons, blessed by the Emperor himself, imbued with faith and fury. Against mortal slavers, it was absurd overkill. Guilliman didn't care. He stepped into the corridor and announced his presence with a voice that carried absolute authority. "I am Roboute Guilliman, and I'm here for Commander T'Pol. Anyone who interferes will die. Choose wisely." The guards froze for exactly 1 second, shock overriding training. Then they opened fire. Disruptor bolts lanced through the air, impacting Guilliman's armor with thunderous force. The armor of Fate's shields absorbed most of the energy, dispersing it across the surface, while the ceramite plating beneath caught what penetrated. Guilliman walked forward through the barrage like a man strolling through rain. The Emperor's sword swept in a horizontal arc, cutting through a disruptor rifle and the hands holding it with equal ease. The wounded Orion screamed and collapsed. Guilliman's backhand strike caught another guard across the torso, sending him crashing into the wall with bone-breaking force. "Last chance," Guilliman said, his voice carrying no anger, just patient certainty. "Surrender or die." 2 guards ran. Smart. 3 remained, either braver or stupider, intensifying their fire. Guilliman closed the distance in 3 strides, the Emperor's sword describing precise arcs that disarmed, literally, 2 more guards. The 3rd he simply grabbed by the collar and threw with sufficient force to embed the Orion into the corridor bulkhead. The reinforced door proved no obstacle. Guilliman's armored fist struck the biometric lock with devastating force, shattering the mechanism and triggering emergency releases. The door slid open. T'Pol sat in the center of the small cell, hands secured with neural inhibitors, her Vulcan composure intact despite obvious bruising on her face and arms. She looked up at Guilliman's entrance without visible surprise. "Mr. Guilliman," she said calmly, "your timing is adequate." "Only adequate?" Guilliman said, kneeling to examine the neural inhibitors. "I fought through an entire station for adequate?" "Precision would have been arriving before they captured me," T'Pol observed. "However, given the circumstances, adequate is acceptable." Guilliman smiled despite himself. He missed Vulcan logic. Something about its absolute commitment to reason reminded him of the better aspects of Imperial culture. His armored fingers worked at the inhibitors, applying carefully measured force to bypass the locking mechanism without triggering the neural discharge. "How many hostiles remain between us and extraction?" T'Pol asked as the inhibitors released. "Unknown," Guilliman admitted. "But they're now aware of my presence and likely converging on this position. We need to move quickly." "I am capable of movement," T'Pol confirmed, standing with controlled precision despite her injuries. "However, I am unarmed and my combat effectiveness is limited. Then stay behind me, Guilliman said, moving to the cell entrance. Guilliman to Enterprise. I have Commander T'Pol. Preparing for extraction. Recommend immediate transporter lock. We can't get a lock through the station's shields. Archer's frustrated voice replied. You need to get her to an exterior section where the shielding is weaker. Understood, Guilliman said. Moving to hull section 7, coordinates already transmitted. Guilliman, sensors are showing approximately 15 hostiles converging on your position. Reed reported. You're about to have company. Excellent, Guilliman said, surprising everyone listening. Commander T'Pol, stay directly behind me and do not engage unless absolutely necessary. This is about to become loud. They emerged into the corridor to find it filled with Orion Syndicate members, not guards this time, but actual Syndicate enforcers. Heavily armed, combat experienced, and very, very angry that someone had invaded their territory. The lead enforcer, a massive Orion male with cybernetic enhancements, and a disruptor cannon that required 2 hands to wield, leveled his weapon at Guilliman. You've made a mistake coming here, human, the enforcer growled. The Syndicate doesn't forget insults. I don't care, Guilliman said simply and charged. What followed was brutal, efficient, and completely one-sided. Guilliman moved through the Orions like a scythe through wheat. The Emperor's sword carved through disruptor rifles, cybernetic enhancements, and overconfident mercenaries with equal ease. His armor absorbed hits that would have killed baseline humans, dispersing energy and kinetic force while he delivered devastating counterattacks. He didn't kill unless necessary. Incapacitating strikes were sufficient for most opponents. But when the Syndicate enforcers proved stubborn, when they refused to retreat and continued pressing their attack, Guilliman responded with the remorseless efficiency of someone who'd fought in wars these people couldn't imagine. The corridor became a charnel house of unconscious and bleeding Orions. T'Pol followed in Guilliman's wake, her Vulcan nerve pinch dropping 2 opportunistic attackers who tried to flank around the armored giant. Your combat efficiency is impressive, T'Pol observed as they fought through another defensive position. However, your methods are excessively violent. They're trying to kill us, Guilliman noted, deflecting disruptor fire with his armored vambrace. True. But you appear to be enjoying the combat. Guilliman paused mid-strike, honestly considering the observation. Perhaps, he admitted. It's been a long time since I fought without the weight of command, without having to consider strategic implications or political consequences. This is simple. Direct. They're slavers, I'm rescuing their prisoner, and violence is the appropriate solution. There's clarity in that. Fascinating, T'Pol said. You find moral simplicity in combat. I find peace in having a clear enemy and a righteous cause, Guilliman clarified, resuming his advance. It's rare in my experience. They reached the hull section, an external cargo bay with minimal shielding. Guilliman immediately contacted Enterprise. Extraction point reached. Standing by for transport. We're detecting the Orion patrol ships powering weapons, Reed warned. They're targeting Enterprise. We need to raise shields, which will prevent you from getting a transporter lock, Guilliman said, immediately understanding the tactical dilemma. Exactly, Archer confirmed, frustration evident. We can either defend ourselves or extract you. Not both. T'Pol and Guilliman exchanged glances. Captain, Guilliman said calmly. Defend your ship. Commander T'Pol and I will find another extraction method. Guilliman, those patrol ships will target the station once they realize you're still there, Archer protested. I'm aware, Guilliman said. Which gives us approximately 3 minutes to appropriate alternative transportation. Guilliman out. He turned to T'Pol. Can you pilot an Orion shuttle? If necessary. T'Pol confirmed. Though I should note that stealing a shuttle while surrounded by hostile forces is highly illogical. I've done more illogical things today, Guilliman said. Follow me. They found the shuttle bay through pure tactical instinct, Guilliman's pattern recognition identifying the architectural cues of a launching facility. 3 shuttles sat in various states of repair, 2 of which appeared functional. That one, T'Pol said, pointing to the most intact vessel. Type 4 Orion Scout. Fast, maneuverable, and already fueled. Perfect, Guilliman said. Get it started. I'll handle our inevitable pursuers. T'Pol moved toward the shuttle with controlled urgency while Guilliman positioned himself at the bay entrance. The Orion response force arrived within 30 seconds, predictable, organized, and completely unprepared for a Primarch defending a choke point. The Emperor's sword made the bay entrance impassable. Guilliman held the doorway alone, his enhanced reflexes and centuries of experience turning him into an impenetrable barrier. Orions tried to rush, tried to flank, tried to suppress him with concentrated fire. All failed. Shuttle is ready, T'Pol announced from the cockpit. Guilliman began a fighting retreat, step by controlled step, maintaining defensive position while gradually falling back toward the shuttle. Disruptor fire scorched his armor, warning indicators flashing across his helmet display, but nothing penetrated to actual injury. He reached the shuttle's boarding ramp, back through the entrance, and slammed the manual seal. Go! T'Pol didn't need to be told twice. The shuttle's engines roared to life, gravitational stabilizers engaging as the vessel lifted from the deck. The bay's atmospheric containment failed as she forced the shuttle through emergency launch protocols, venting the entire compartment into space and sending pursuing Orions tumbling into the void. Guilliman to Enterprise, the Primarch transmitted as the shuttle cleared the station. We've acquired alternative transportation. Recommend combat maneuvers to suppress those patrol ships while we rendezvous. Copy that, Archer replied, relief evident in his voice. Malcolm, give those patrol ships something to think about. Travis, position us to retrieve that shuttle. The brief space battle that followed was more harassment than serious engagement. Enterprise's phase cannons keeping the Orion vessels defensive while T'Pol piloted the stolen shuttle on an intercept course. Within minutes, both the shuttle and its occupants were safely aboard Enterprise's docking bay. Captain Archer met them personally, his expression cycling between relief, frustration, and grudging admiration. Commander T'Pol, welcome back, he said formally. Medical team is standing by. I am functional, Captain, T'Pol replied. Though a medical examination would be prudent. Archer turned to Guilliman, who was removing his helmet to reveal the slight smile that suggested satisfaction with a mission accomplished. You, the captain said, are either the best asset Starfleet never recruited or the most dangerous variable I've ever allowed aboard my ship. I'm still not sure which. Can I be both? Guilliman asked. I don't know what you are, Archer admitted. But you brought my officer home. That counts for something. As T'Pol was escorted to medical and the crew stood down from alert status, Guilliman stood in the docking bay, cleaning Orion blood from the Emperor's sword with a maintenance cloth. Shran approached, his antennae tilted forward with unmistakable respect. That was the most Andorian thing I've ever seen a human do, the commander said. Solo assault, overwhelming force, complete disregard for personal safety in pursuit of a righteous goal. You honor the warrior tradition, Primarch. I did what was necessary, Guilliman said simply. That's what warriors do, Shran agreed. The question is, what else are you capable of? What would you do if you decided the Enterprise, or the Coalition, was the enemy rather than the objective? Guilliman met the Andorian's gaze steadily. Then you would face the same force I just brought against those slavers. Overwhelming, remorseless, and ultimately unstoppable. Which is why I've chosen very carefully to be on your side, Commander Shran. Because the alternative would be tragic for everyone involved. Honest answer, Shran said. I respect that. But it's also terrifying. It should be. Guilliman agreed. Fear of what I could do is appropriate. Trust that I won't is what we're building here. Slowly. Carefully. One mission at a time. as Enterprise set course away from the abandoned station. Leaving the Orion Syndicate to contemplate the consequences of holding Starfleet prisoners, Roboute Guilliman returned to his quarters and composed another unsent message. Father, *. Today I remembered what it's like to fight for something simple. To save a life because it was the right thing to do, not because strategic calculations demanded it. These humans have given me that. The opportunity to be a weapon with a righteous cause instead of an administrator managing endless compromise. *. I'm starting to understand why you valued the Great Crusade's early years, before the Imperium became the thing we built it to prevent. *. Thank you for creating me capable of this. Even if you never read this. Even if I'm alone in this distant galaxy. *. Thank you. *. He deleted the message, as always. But the gratitude remained. Commander Charles Tucker found Guilliman in Enterprise's aft observation lounge at 0300 hours, standing before the viewport in the darkness, watching stars streak past at warp 5. Can't sleep either? Trip asked, entering with 2 cups of coffee. I don't sleep much, Guilliman said without turning. My physiology requires approximately 2 hours rest per 72-hour cycle. Anything more feels wasteful. Trip handed him one of the cups anyway. Guilliman took it with surprising gentleness, his massive gauntlet fingers dwarfing the standard-issue mug. We need to talk, Trip said, settling into one of the observation chairs. About what T'Pol found in your armor's data fragments. Guilliman's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, the subtle tension of someone whose secrets were being exposed. I was wondering when this conversation would happen. She's been analyzing the damaged memory cores in your armor for weeks, Trip continued. Most of it's corrupted beyond recovery. Different dimensional physics, she thinks, scrambled the data storage medium. But she recovered fragments. Dates. Historical references. Technological specifications. And? Guilliman prompted, his tone carefully neutral. And the dates don't make sense, Trip said. References to the 41st millennium. Earth as the center of a galaxy-spanning empire. Technologies that make our warp drive look like a wooden wagon compared to a starship. Wars against species we've never heard of, orcs, tyrannids, something called chaos. Guilliman took a slow sip of coffee, buying time to formulate his response. What did T'Pol conclude? That you're either from Earth's distant future, from an alternate reality where humanity developed very differently, or you're an incredibly sophisticated fabrication designed to manipulate us. Trip's voice held no accusation, just exhausted confusion. She's leaning toward alternate reality. Says the cultural and technological divergence is too extreme to be linear future progression. T'Pol is correct, Guilliman said quietly. I'm not from your future. I'm from a different version of humanity's development. A reality where different choices, different crises, different philosophies led us down a very different path. The Imperium, Trip said. That's what your armor calls it. The Imperium of man. Your people built an empire spanning millions of worlds, ruled by someone called the Emperor. My father, Guilliman said, the word carrying weight Trip couldn't fully understand. The Emperor of mankind. The greatest human who ever lived, in my reality. He unified Terra, Earth, during the Age of Strife, then launched the Great Crusade to reclaim humanity's lost colonies across the galaxy. And you? Trip asked. The fragments reference something called Primarchs. 20 genetic constructs designed to be the Emperor's generals. Living weapons. Demigods. I am Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch said, turning to face Trip directly. The 13th Primarch. Lord Commander of the Ultramarines Legion. Avenging Sun. Master of Ultramar. Builder of the 500 worlds. I was created in a laboratory, engineered from my father's own genetic template, to be the perfect general. The perfect administrator. The perfect weapon. The words hung in the air between them. Holy hell, Trip breathed. You're not just enhanced. You're designed. Built from the ground up to be superhuman. Yes, Guilliman confirmed. Everything about me, my size, my strength, my cognitive capabilities, my strategic genius, was deliberately engineered. I'm not human in the way you understand humanity, Commander Tucker. I'm post-human. Transhuman. A stepping stone toward what the Emperor believed humanity could become. Trip stood pacing, processing. And your Imperium, what's it like? Guilliman's expression darkened. Brutal. Necessary. Magnificent and terrible in equal measure. We rule 1,000,000 worlds through absolute force. We exterminate Xenos species that threaten humanity. We burn heretics who worship the chaos gods. We sacrifice billions to save trillions. We've become the monsters we fought to survive becoming, because the alternative was extinction. That's horrifying, Tripp said. Yes, Guilliman agreed without defensiveness. It is. We live in a galaxy of eternal war, Commander, where humanity's enemies include species that devour entire civilizations, mechanical horrors that want to exterminate all organic life, and literal demons born from humanity's darkest emotions. The Imperium is cruel, authoritarian, and built on foundations of suffering. It's also the only thing keeping humanity alive. And you ruled this empire? Part of it, Guilliman said. I rebuilt it, actually. I was dead in stasis for 10,000 years. When I awoke, the Imperium had decayed into parody of my father's vision. I'm trying to reform it. Make it better. Preserve what makes us worth saving while maintaining the strength necessary for survival. Tripp sat down heavily. Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning? Would you have believed me? Guilliman asked. Would Captain Archer have accepted a genetically engineered demigod from an alternate reality where humanity rules through force and faith? Or would you have seen me as a threat to be contained? We would have been terrified. Tripp admitted. Hell, I'm terrified right now, and you've spent weeks proving you're on our side. Exactly, Guilliman said. I needed time. Time to demonstrate my intentions through actions rather than claims. Time to build provisional trust. Time to show that despite what I am, despite where I come from, I genuinely want to help your humanity survive. Why? Tripp demanded. Why help us? We're not your Imperium. We're weak by your standards. We cooperate with Xenos, which your people apparently exterminate. We value peace over conquest. Why would you care if we survive? Guilliman was silent for a long moment, gazing out at the stars. Because you're what we could have been, he said finally. In my reality, humanity faced extinction during the Age of Strife. We were scattered, isolated, preyed upon by Xenos and chaos. When my father reunified us, the only path forward was through absolute force. We became conquerors because anything less meant death. He turned back to Tripp. But you. Your humanity developed differently. You faced crises, yes? The Shindy nearly destroyed Earth. But you survived through cooperation, alliance building, maintaining your principles. You're building something my Imperium never had, genuine multi-species cooperation based on mutual benefit rather than subjugation. You're proving that strength and idealism can coexist. You think we can succeed where your Imperium failed? Tripp asked. I think you represent an alternative path, Guilliman said. A possibility that humanity can be strong without being monstrous. That we can survive through wisdom and cooperation instead of through domination and fear. I want to see if that's possible. And if it is, if you succeed, then maybe the Imperium's cruelty wasn't inevitable. Maybe there was always another way, and we simply never found it. Tripp processed this, his engineer's mind working through implications. T'Pol wants to tell Captain Archer everything. She says keeping secrets this significant is ethically compromising. She's right. Guilliman acknowledged. Logical as always. What stopped her? Me. Tripp admitted. I asked her to wait. To let me talk to you first. To understand why you've been hiding this before we decide what to do with the information. And now that you understand? Tripp looked at the Primarch, truly looked at him, seeing not just the armored warrior but the lonely exile from a reality of endless war. Now I'm going to tell her we need to bring this to Archer ourselves. All of us together. No more secrets. I agree, Guilliman said, surprising Tripp with his immediate acceptance. I've been expecting this conversation since T'Pol started analyzing my armor's data. If anything, I'm grateful it took this long. It gave me time to prove myself through actions. Are you going to tell Archer everything? Tripp asked. About the Emperor? The Great Crusade? The what did you call them? Chaos Gods? I'll tell him what's relevant to your situation, Guilliman said carefully. The complete truth of the Imperium, the Horus heresy, the demon incursions, the full horror of chaos. That would sound like madness. But the fundamental facts? That I'm from an alternate reality where humanity evolved differently? That I'm genetically engineered? That I have tactical and strategic experience spanning centuries? Yes. He deserves honesty. He's going to have questions, Tripp warned. I'm sure he will, Guilliman agreed. As will T'Pol. And Lieutenant Reed. And probably every intelligence agency in your coalition. But I've spent weeks establishing my intentions through demonstrated loyalty. That foundation of trust should carry weight when revelations challenge it. Tripp stood, offering his hand. For what it's worth. I believe you want to help. I think you're genuinely trying to preserve what we're building here. But I also think you're dangerous in ways we're only beginning to understand. Guilliman shook the offered hand carefully. Your assessment is accurate, Commander. I am dangerous. But I'm trying very hard to ensure that danger is directed toward your enemies rather than toward you. The senior staff meeting convened 12 hours later in Enterprise's briefing room. Captain Archer, T'Pol, Tripp, Reed, and Hoshi sat on one side of the table. Guilliman stood on the other, his armor too large for the standard chairs, his presence dominating the room despite his attempt to position himself non-threateningly. Commander T'Pol has made a discovery. Archer began without preamble. Something that significantly changes our understanding of Mr. Guilliman's origins. T'Pol? The Vulcan activated the view screen, displaying fragments of recovered data, corrupted text, partial schematics, dates that defied conventional chronology. I have been analyzing the damaged memory storage within Mr. Guilliman's armor, T'Pol explained with characteristic precision. The data medium uses technology unfamiliar to Federation science, stored at quantum levels that our reality's physics appear to have partially degraded. However, I successfully recovered approximately 8% of the original content. She highlighted specific fragments. These references indicate an origin date in what would translate to the 41st millennium by Terran calendar, approximately 39,000 years in our future. However, the cultural and technological descriptions are inconsistent with projected human development. This suggests Mr. Guilliman originates not from our future, but from an alternate reality with divergent historical progression. Alternate reality, Reed repeated skeptically. You're saying he's from another dimension? The evidence supports that conclusion, T'Pol confirmed. Furthermore, the recovered data includes references to genetic engineering on a scale far beyond current capabilities. Template, Primarch. Designation 13. Function, Military Command and Strategic Administration. Mr. Guilliman is not simply an enhanced human. He is a deliberately designed transhuman organism. All eyes turned to Guilliman. Is this true? Archer asked quietly. Yes, Guilliman said simply. Everything Commander T'Pol discovered is accurate. I am from an alternate reality, a different version of human development. I was created through genetic engineering to serve as military commander for a galaxy-spanning human empire. And I've been withholding these facts because I believed, correctly I think, that the truth would make you view me as a threat rather than an ally. You've been lying to us for weeks, Reed said, his hand instinctively near his phase pistol. I've been selectively truthful, Guilliman corrected. Everything I've told you about facing hostile Xenos, about developing military doctrine under existential threat, about building civilizations capable of survival, all true. I simply omitted the specific context of where and when those experiences occurred. That's a significant omission, Archer said, his voice carefully controlled. It is, Guilliman agreed. And I apologize for the deception. But consider. If I'd arrived and immediately announced I was a genetically engineered demigod from an alternate reality where humanity rules a million worlds through authoritarian force, would you have given me the chance to demonstrate my intentions? Or would you have confined me as a potential threat? The silence that followed was answer enough. T'Pol spoke with Vulcan directness. Your assessment was logical. However, continued deception is not sustainable. This information will eventually spread beyond this room. Starfleet Command will demand answers. Intelligence agencies will investigate. The Coalition ambassadors will question your presence and influence. How do you propose we address these inevitable complications? With the truth, Guilliman said. Or at least, as much truth as they can accept. I'm from an alternate reality. I'm genetically enhanced. I have extensive military experience from conflicts in my home dimension. I'm stranded here with no way to return. And I've chosen to help your humanity because I value what you're building and want to see if cooperation can succeed where my reality's domination failed. Why should we believe any of that? Reed challenged. You've already admitted to lying. How do we know this isn't just another layer of deception? You don't, Guilliman said bluntly. You can't. That's the fundamental problem with trust, Lieutenant Reed. It requires accepting some level of uncertainty. But consider my actions over the past weeks. I've trained your soldiers in tactics that make them more effective. I've provided strategic advice that saved lives during the Romulan encounter. I risked myself to rescue Commander T'Pol. Every action I've taken has benefited your crew and your coalition. Or positioned yourself as indispensable. Reed countered, making us dependent on your expertise. Perhaps, Guilliman conceded. But dependency flows both ways. I'm alone here, stranded in an unfamiliar reality, completely cut off from my home. I need you as much as you need me. You provide purpose, community, context for existence. We're mutually dependent, Lieutenant. That's the foundation of genuine alliance. Hoshi, who had been silent throughout the exchange, spoke up hesitantly. The data fragments T'Pol recovered. They mentioned something called the Emperor. And wars against things called Chaos Gods. What are those? Guilliman's expression darkened visibly. The Emperor was my father. The founder of the Imperium of Man, the greatest human who ever lived in my reality. As for Chaos. He paused, choosing words carefully. Imagine that consciousness itself generates energy. That emotions, rage, despair, ambition, pleasure, create ripples in an alternate dimension that humans in my reality call the warp. Now imagine those ripples coalescing into entities. Predatory intelligences born from humanity's darkest impulses. Psychic entities, T'Pol said thoughtfully. Emergent consciousness from collective emotional resonance. Theoretically possible if quantum consciousness theory is correct and alternate dimensional physics allows such consolidation. They're real enough, Guilliman said grimly. And they're the reason my Imperium is so brutally authoritarian. Because falling to chaos corruption means literally losing your soul to demonic possession. The Imperium's cruelty exists to prevent something worse. Entire populations transformed into vessels for entities that feed on suffering and madness. The room fell silent as the implication settled. That's nightmare fuel, Tripp said finally. Your reality fights literal demons? Among other threats, Guilliman confirmed. Chaos is just one existential danger. We also face species like the Tyranids, organic swarms that devour all life from entire star systems. The Necrons, ancient mechanical horrors that want to exterminate all organic existence. The Orcs, fungoid species engineered for eternal war. My reality is hostile in ways yours can barely imagine. And you want to help us avoid becoming like your Imperium? Archer said, understanding dawning. You're trying to prevent us from making the same choices that led your humanity down that path. Yes, Guilliman said. But also acknowledging that some hard choices may be necessary. The Romulans are testing you. Other threats will emerge. The galaxy, your galaxy, may not be as hostile as mine, but it's not peaceful. You need strength. The question is whether you can develop that strength without sacrificing your principles. I don't know if it's possible, but I want to help you try. Archer leaned back, processing everything. If we accept this, if we choose to work with you despite these revelations, what are you asking from us? Time, Guilliman said. Permission to continue training your soldiers, advising your tactical planning, helping you build the foundations of strength necessary for survival. In exchange, I'll provide complete tactical honesty within operational parameters, fight alongside you against your enemies, and accept your command authority as legitimate. I won't disappoint that trust. You already have, Archer said bluntly, by lying about your origins. The question is whether you'll earn that trust back through future honesty. Time will tell. As the meeting dispersed, T'Pol approached Guilliman privately. A logical question, she said. If you possess the tactical and strategic expertise of someone from a civilization 39 millennia more advanced than ours, why do you need us? Why not simply build your own power base, develop your own forces, pursue your own agenda independent of human cooperation? Guilliman smiled slightly. Because I've already ruled an empire, Commander T'Pol. I've commanded fleets numbering thousands of vessels. I've administered star systems and made decisions affecting billions. And I've learned that power without purpose is just elaborate loneliness. Your enterprise crew, your coalition, your struggling experiment in multi-species cooperation, you give me purpose. A reason to use these abilities for something beyond mere survival or dominance. That's worth more than any empire I could build alone. T'Pol regarded him with penetrating analysis. Fascinating. You're a weapon-seeking justification for existence beyond violence. The existential crisis of a post-human entity discovering the limitations of pure capability. When you put it that way, it sounds almost poetic, Guilliman said dryly. It is logical, T'Pol corrected. And potentially valuable. A being with your capabilities but seeking ethical application rather than pure dominance represents significant advantage for our coalition. Assuming your stated motivations are genuine. Only time will prove that, Guilliman acknowledged. But I'm patient. I have literal centuries of experience with long-term planning. I can wait for your trust. As the Primarch departed, leaving the senior staff to debrief privately, Roboute Guilliman felt something unexpected. Relief. The secrets were exposed. The fundamental truths were revealed. And they hadn't immediately turned against him. Perhaps this strange, idealistic, catastrophically unprepared version of humanity could surprise him after all. Perhaps honesty, that most difficult of strategies, might work where manipulation would eventually fail. Perhaps, just perhaps, he'd found something worth preserving in this alternate reality. Time would tell. But for the first time since his arrival, Roboute Guilliman allowed himself to hope. The message arrived on a Vulcan diplomatic frequency, encrypted with codes that identified it as originating from the Romulan Star Empire. Captain Archer stood on the bridge, reading the decoded text for the third time, his expression growing darker with each pass. They want to meet, he said quietly. Face to face. They're proposing neutral ground, an abandoned monastery on Pon Mokar, a world along the neutral zone. They claim they want to discuss mutual concerns regarding destabilizing elements affecting regional security. It's a trap, Malcolm Reed stated immediately. Obviously. Commander Shran agreed from the communications station. The Romulans don't do diplomacy. They do deception with diplomatic window dressing. T'Pol studied the message with analytical precision. However, refusing contact eliminates any possibility of genuine diplomatic resolution. If the Romulans are genuinely concerned about escalation, this represents an opportunity to establish communication protocols that could prevent future conflicts. Or it's an opportunity to assassinate Enterprise's command staff. Reed countered. Roboute Guilliman stepped forward from his position at the rear of the bridge, a spot he'd occupied increasingly often as the crew had grown accustomed to his presence. "May I read the message, Captain?" Archer handed over the PADD. Guilliman's enhanced eyes scanned the text in seconds, his expression thoughtful. "The phrasing is interesting," the Primarch observed. "Destabilizing elements affecting regional security. They're not talking about your ship, Captain. They're talking about me." The bridge fell silent. "You?" Tripp said from engineering station. "Why would the Romulans care about you specifically?" "Because I'm an unknown variable in their strategic calculations," Guilliman explained. "They've been watching Enterprise for weeks, gathering intelligence, building tactical profiles. Suddenly you defeat two warbuds using tactics they've never seen before. Then you successfully extract a prisoner from an Orion Syndicate facility that should have been impregnable. Your capabilities have increased dramatically and unpredictably. They want to know why. And they've concluded you're the reason," Archer said, understanding dawning. "I would have reached the same conclusion," Guilliman confirmed. "An unknown armored giant appears aboard Enterprise, your tactical effectiveness immediately improves, and you start winning engagements you should lose. If I were Romulan intelligence, I'd want to assess this new variable. Determine if it's a singular anomaly or the first indication of broader human military advancement. So we don't go," Reed said. "We refuse contact and maintain operational security. Or we use their curiosity against them," Guilliman suggested. "They want to assess me? Let them. But we control the circumstances, dictate the terms, and extract intelligence of our own in the process." Shran's antennae tilted forward with interest. "You're proposing we attend this meeting?" "I'm proposing we turn it into an opportunity," Guilliman said. "The Romulans believe they're gathering intelligence. We'll ensure they receive exactly the intelligence we want them to have. That humanity is stronger than they assumed, allied with capable partners, and not worth the cost of invasion. Deterrence through calculated revelation. That's dangerous," T'Pol observed. "Revealing your capabilities could trigger preemptive action rather than deterrence. Only if we reveal vulnerability alongside strength," Guilliman countered. "They need to see me as powerful but aligned with you. A weapon they cannot subvert, cannot defeat, and cannot afford to provoke. Make me the reason attacking Earth becomes strategically unviable." Archer considered the proposal, weighing risks against potential benefits. "You're talking about using yourself as bait." "I'm talking about using myself as deterrent," Guilliman corrected. "There's a difference. Bait is designed to lure enemies into traps. Deterrent is designed to make enemies decide the fight isn't worth having." "And if they try to kill you anyway?" Tripp asked. Guilliman smiled coldly. "Then they'll learn why that's a mistake. And the survivors will carry that lesson back to their commanders." The decision took Archer less than a minute. "We go. But with conditions. Full security detail. Makos and Andorian guard both. We choose the meeting location within the monastery complex. And at the first sign of treachery, we extract immediately." "Agreed," Guilliman said. "Though I suspect the Romulans will honor the meeting protocols. They want intelligence, not martyrs. Dead diplomats tell no tales, but living witnesses spread fear very effectively." 3 days later, Enterprise entered orbit around Pon Mokar, a dead world with thin atmosphere and a single remarkable feature. An ancient monastery carved into the planet's largest mountain. The structure predated both Vulcan and Romulan civilizations, built by a species long extinct, now serving as occasional neutral ground for entities seeking privacy. 2 Romulan warbuds in high orbit, Reed reported. "Weapons powered but not targeted. They're maintaining position exactly as specified in the meeting protocols." "Mako's ready, Captain," Major Hayes confirmed. 12 personnel in full combat gear. We've secured the primary monastery chamber and established fallback positions. Andorian guards standing by. Shran added. My people are monitoring all approach vectors. If the Romulans attempt infiltration, we'll know. Guilliman stood near the transporter pad, wearing full armor of fate, the Emperor's sword maglocked to his back. He'd spent the previous 2 days in preparation, not physical training, but psychological preparation for what would essentially be theater. He needed to project strength, confidence, and barely restrained lethality. He needed the Romulans to see him and decide that provoking humanity was strategically inadvisable. You ready for this? Archer asked quietly. I've negotiated with Xenos species across hundreds of worlds, Guilliman replied. Some of those negotiations involved species that viewed consumption of negotiating partners as acceptable diplomatic conclusion. The Romulans are at least humanoid and share basic communication protocols. I'll manage. Just try not to start a war, Archer said. Captain, if I wanted to start a war, I wouldn't need to attend diplomatic meetings, Guilliman pointed out. I'd simply walk through their warbids demonstrating what 3 meters of transhuman fury can accomplish. This is me being diplomatic. The away team materialized in the monastery's central chamber. A vast circular space with walls covered in alien script no one had successfully translated. Archer, T'Pol, Reed, and Guilliman stood together, flanked by 4 Makos with phase rifles ready. The Romulans were already there. 3 figures stood in formal military dress, green and gray uniforms cut with severe precision, faces eerily similar to Vulcans but marked by something harder, more predatory. The central figure wore commander's insignia and stood with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Captain Archer, the Romulan commander said, his voice carrying cultured menace. I am Commander Valdor of the Romulan Star Empire. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Commander, Archer acknowledged neutrally. You mentioned mutual concerns. Indeed, Valdor said, but his attention had already shifted to Guilliman. The Romulan's expression didn't change. Perfect control, but his eyes betrayed fascination mixed with calculation. And this must be the destabilizing element we've observed. Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch said, stepping forward with deliberate menace. His armor made soft mechanical sounds with each movement, and his height forced the Romulans to look up. I understand you've been asking questions about me. Curiosity is natural when encountering the unprecedented, Valdor said smoothly. A 3-meter armored warrior appears aboard a human vessel, and suddenly that vessel's tactical capabilities improve dramatically. We find this interesting. I'm sure you do, Guilliman said. Just as I find it interesting that your empire has been probing Federation space with increasing aggression. Testing defenses. Mapping patrol routes. Preparing strategic assessments. One might conclude you're planning something inadvisable. Valdor's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, surprised that this armored human spoke so directly. The Romulan Star Empire takes defensive preparation seriously. Surely you understand the necessity of knowing one's neighbors. I understand the difference between defensive preparation and invasion reconnaissance, Guilliman countered. I've conducted both across more worlds than your empire has catalogued. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending your recent activities are purely defensive. Bold words, one of Valdor's subordinates said. For someone who appeared from nowhere, claiming origins no one can verify. My origins are irrelevant, Guilliman said. What matters is my present reality. I'm here. I'm allied with humanity. And I possess tactical expertise that makes your current strategic calculations obsolete. One warrior cannot change the balance of power, Valdor stated. Can't I? Guilliman asked. Your warbids attacked a civilian transport. I taught Enterprise's crew how to defeat them using tactical principles your commanders had never encountered. The Orion Syndicate believed their station was secure. I personally extracted a prisoner and stole one of their shuttles. You believe your cloaking technology provides decisive advantage. I can teach human forces how to fight enemies they cannot see. He took another step forward, his presence dominating the chamber. I'm not changing the balance of power, Commander Valdor. I'm demonstrating that the balance you thought existed was illusion. Humanity is stronger than you calculated. Their allies are more capable than you assumed. And their willingness to defend themselves is absolute. Attack them, and you'll discover exactly how expensive that mistake becomes. Threats, Valdor said coldly. Hardly diplomatic. Not threats, Guilliman corrected. Deterrence. I'm providing you with intelligence that should inform your strategic planning. The Federation is not the easy target your analysts projected. Push too hard, and you'll trigger a war your empire cannot afford. Especially not with the Klingon watching, waiting for any sign of Romulan weakness to exploit. The mention of the Klingon caused visible reaction. Brief, quickly controlled, but present. Guilliman filed that information away. The Romulans feared Klingon opportunism. You're patient, disciplined, and utterly convinced of your cultural superiority. An accurate assessment, Valdor admitted. Which makes you predictable. Guilliman continued. You'll test the Federation through proxies. Manipulate events to weaken Human-Vulcan alliance. Attempt to isolate Earth diplomatically before striking militarily. It's sound strategy. It would work against the humanity I encountered when I first arrived. And now? Valdor prompted. Now you're facing a humanity that's learning, Guilliman said. That's adapting. That's building alliances with species like the Andorians and Tellarites. That's developing military doctrines specifically designed to counter threats like your empire. You can still win a war against them, Commander. But the cost has increased dramatically. And it will continue increasing with every day I help them prepare. Valdor studied Guilliman with penetrating intensity. You speak as if you've fought galactic-scale wars. I have, Guilliman said simply. In places you cannot imagine, against enemies that would make your empire seem like minor regional power. I've commanded fleets numbering thousands of vessels. I've defended worlds against extinction-level threats. I've built civilizations from ruins and written tactical doctrines that governed armies spanning light years. Compared to what I've faced, your Romulan Star Empire is manageable. Arrogance, Valdor's subordinate said. Experience, Guilliman corrected. And a warning. The Federation is under my protection now. Not because I command them, I don't. But because I've chosen to help them survive. And I'm very, very good at ensuring things I protect continue existing. T'Pol spoke for the first time, her Vulcan logic cutting through the testosterone-laden posturing. Commander Valdor, this meeting was proposed to discuss mutual concerns. Thus far, we have engaged in threat assessment and strategic positioning. Perhaps we should address the actual question. What do you want? Valdor's attention shifted to her, and something like respect flickered across his features. Vulcan directness. Refreshing. Very well. We want assurance that this, he gestured to Guilliman, is singular. That humanity has not developed transhuman enhancement technology or made contact with species providing significant military advancement. In other words, Archer said, you want to know if there are more like him coming. Precisely. Valdor confirmed. Guilliman smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. I'm unique, Commander. There is no technology that will produce more of me. No secret program creating enhanced warriors. I'm an accident of dimensional physics, a single variable that happened to appear in this reality. You won't face armies of Guillimans. That's reassuring, Valdor said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. However, Guilliman continued, what you will face is every tactical lesson I can teach. Every strategic doctrine I can share. Every countermeasure I can devise against your cloaking technology, your ambush tactics, your long-term manipulation strategies. I'm one warrior, yes. But I'm a teacher. And I'm very patient about education. So your purpose is to militarize the Federation, Valdor concluded. My purpose is to ensure the Federation survives, Guilliman corrected. If survival requires military strength, then yes, I'll help them develop that strength. But I'm also teaching them restraint, strategic thinking, and the wisdom to avoid unnecessary conflicts. I'm not creating conquerors, Commander. I'm creating defenders who cannot be conquered. Valdor was silent for a long moment, processing. Then, you're aware that making humanity stronger increases the likelihood they'll eventually threaten Romulus? I'm aware that making humanity weak guarantees someone will destroy them, Guilliman countered. And I've decided their survival matters more than your comfort with regional power balance. If that creates tensions between your empire and the Federation, perhaps you should consider diplomatic engagement rather than military preparation. The Romulan Empire does not negotiate from weakness, Valdor stated. Then negotiate from strength, Guilliman suggested. Establish formal relations. Create trade agreements. Build communication protocols that prevent misunderstandings from escalating into conflicts. You're both intelligent species capable of coexistence. The only question is whether your pride will allow you to admit that cooperation might serve your interests better than isolation and eventual war. You speak like a diplomat, Valdor observed with faint surprise. I've built empires, Commander, Guilliman said. That requires more than military prowess. It requires understanding when to fight, when to negotiate, and when to simply make clear that certain actions will trigger consequences no rational actor would accept. I'm offering you that clarity now. Leave the Federation alone. They're stronger than you calculated and getting stronger. Find other borders to test. Other species to manipulate. Other regions to expand into. Because this one is occupied. The silence that followed was broken by Valdor's soft, bitter laugh. Extraordinary, the Romulan commander said. You attend a diplomatic meeting and deliver an ultimatum. You claim to value peace while threatening war. You're either the most sophisticated negotiator I've encountered or the most dangerous man ever to walk through an airlock. Why can't I be both? Guilliman asked with slight amusement. Valdor actually smiled, brief, genuine, before his diplomatic mask reasserted itself. I will relay your message to my superiors. They will make their own assessments regarding the Federation's strategic value as a target. But I will personally note that the variable of your presence significantly complicates invasion scenarios. That's all I ask, Guilliman said. Complication. Doubt. The recognition that easy victories aren't guaranteed. Make your commanders think twice before committing to conflict. That's deterrence, Commander. Not through fear alone, but through rational cost-benefit analysis. You understand us well, Valdor acknowledged. I've fought species with similar strategic doctrine, Guilliman said. Secretive. Patient. Preferring manipulation to direct confrontation. The Xenos Eldar in my reality share many of your empire's characteristics. I've learned how to counter them. Those lessons apply here. Xenos Eldar, Valdor repeated, filing away the unfamiliar term. Another fragment of your mysterious past. Another lesson from experience you cannot replicate. Guilliman confirmed. Which is why attacking the Federation becomes inadvisable. You're not just fighting them. You're fighting everything I've learned across conflicts you cannot imagine. The question is whether that's a fight you actually want. Valdor stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. This has been enlightening. Captain Archer, your Federation has acquired a formidable advocate. Whether that proves fortunate or catastrophic remains to be seen. But the Romulan Star Empire acknowledges his presence, and will adjust our strategic assessments accordingly. That's all we ask, Archer said, standing as well. Mutual recognition. Respectful distance. And the wisdom to avoid unnecessary conflicts. We shall see, Valdor said neutrally. As the away team prepared to transport back to Enterprise, Valdor approached Guilliman one final time, speaking too quietly for the others to hear clearly. A question, if I may, the Romulan said. Do you truly believe the Federation can maintain its principles while developing the strength you advocate? That they can become powerful without becoming like your Imperium, or like the Romulan Empire? Guilliman met his gaze steadily. I don't know, Commander. But I believe they deserve the opportunity to try. They represent a possibility, that cooperation and strength can coexist. That diversity can be advantage rather than weakness. If they succeed, it challenges assumptions both our civilizations have made about the necessity of dominance. If they fail, well, at least they failed trying to be better rather than succumbing to easy cruelty. An optimist in transhuman armor, Valdor observed. Truly unprecedented. A pragmatist hoping he's wrong about the inevitability of darkness, Guilliman corrected. There's a difference. The transporter beam took them before Valdor could respond. Back aboard Enterprise, the senior staff debriefed in the conference room. That went better than expected, Tripp said. We didn't start a war, nobody died, and the Romulans are at least considering backing off. They're considering their options, T'Pol corrected. Commander Valdor's assessment was incomplete. He will relay intelligence to superiors who may reach very different conclusions. But we planted doubt, Reed observed. Made them question whether the Federation is worth attacking. That's valuable. It's temporary, Guilliman cautioned. Deterrence only works while they believe the cost exceeds the benefit. The moment they develop tactics they think can counter me, or identify vulnerabilities they can exploit, the calculus changes. This bought time, not permanent peace. Time to do what? Archer asked. To build the Federation properly, Guilliman said. To formalize your coalition into something with unified command, coordinated defenses, and the institutional strength to survive without depending on one armored warrior. I'm a stopgap, Captain. A temporary advantage. You need to use this breathing space to build something sustainable. The coalition conference is in 6 weeks, Archer noted. Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, and Tellar are finalizing the Federation Charter. You should be there. I will be, Guilliman confirmed. And I'll argue for every provision that strengthens your collective defense. Because the Romulans aren't your only potential enemy. The galaxy is large, Captain Archer. Full of species you haven't encountered. Threats you haven't imagined. The Federation needs to be ready for all of it. Or become another cautionary tale, T'Pol said, recalling Guilliman's earlier warning. Exactly, Guilliman agreed. I've seen too many civilizations fall because they weren't prepared. I refuse to watch it happen again. Not while I can help prevent it. As the meeting concluded, Guilliman stood before the observation port, watching Pon Mokar recede as Enterprise departed orbit. He'd threatened the Romulans. Positioned himself as the Federation's guardian. Committed himself to protecting people who weren't even his species by the strict genetic definitions of his home reality. And he'd meant every word. Because somewhere in this strange alternate reality, Roboute Guilliman had found something he'd lost centuries ago in the Imperium. Purpose beyond mere survival. Hope that ideals could survive contact with reality. The belief that maybe, just maybe, humanity could be strong without being monstrous. It was probably naive. It would probably end in disappointment. But for the first time in a very long time, the Primarch was willing to hope anyway. The Federation Charter signing ceremony was scheduled for Earth, in San Francisco, where humanity's fragile coalition would either solidify into something permanent or fracture under the weight of unresolved disagreements. Roboute Guilliman stood in Enterprise's observation lounge, watching Earth grow larger on the view screen. A blue marble suspended against the void, so familiar, and yet so alien to someone from a reality where Terra was a hive world choked with billions, its surface barely visible beneath layers of architecture and industrial sprawl. This Earth was still beautiful. Still green. Still carrying the possibility of something better. You're nervous, Captain Archer observed, entering the lounge with 2 cups of coffee. I don't get nervous, Guilliman said automatically, then reconsidered. That's not true. I'm apprehensive. This moment matters more than you realize, Captain. The decisions made in the next 72 hours will determine whether your species survives the next century. No pressure, Archer said dryly, handing Guilliman one of the cups. I've spent weeks advocating for unified command, coordinated defenses, mandatory military minimums, Guilliman said, accepting the coffee with thanks. And I've watched your delegates fight every recommendation, compromise every provision, dilute every strength-building measure because they're terrified of becoming too militaristic. They're so afraid of becoming conquerors that they're ensuring they'll become victims instead. They're afraid of becoming like your Imperium, Archer said quietly. Guilliman turned to face him, and for a moment the Primarch's carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something raw beneath. My Imperium is a nightmare, Captain. A necessary nightmare, perhaps, but a nightmare nonetheless. We've become exactly what we fought to prevent, authoritarian, cruel, and sustained through violence and fear. But we survived. We endured 10,000 years of horrors that would have exterminated less prepared civilizations. So yes, the Imperium is terrible. But at least we're alive to recognize how terrible we've become. And you want us to find a middle path, Archer said. Strong enough to survive but not so strong we lose our souls. I want you to prove it's possible, Guilliman admitted. Because if you can't, if the only choice really is between soft extinction and hard tyranny, then everything I believed about my father's vision was wrong. Then the Imperium's cruelty was inevitable rather than failure. Then there never was another way. He looked back at Earth, his expression distant. I've spent 300 years, subjective time, accounting for stasis, trying to reform the Imperium. Trying to make it better while keeping it strong enough to survive. And I've failed more often than I've succeeded. But you're starting fresh. You have the opportunity to build something genuinely new. Don't waste it through cowardice disguised as principle. That's what you're going to tell the delegates? Archer asked. Among other things. Guilliman confirmed. I'm also going to reveal the rest of my origins. Not everything. I can't explain chaos or the warp without sounding insane, but enough truth that they understand exactly what I am and where my advice comes from. No more half-truths. No more careful omissions. They deserve complete honesty before making decisions this consequential. Starfleet Command is going to have questions, Archer warned. Admiral Forrest has been very patient about your presence, but he's going to want answers. Then I'll provide them, Guilliman said. I've spent enough time in your reality to recognize that trust requires transparency. I'll tell them I'm a genetically engineered transhuman from an alternate reality where humanity developed through authoritarian militarism. I'll explain that I'm stranded here with no way home. And I'll make clear that despite my origins, I'm genuinely trying to help your humanity survive without repeating my reality's mistakes. And if they decide you're too dangerous to allow free movement? Archer challenged. If they want to confine you? Study you? Contain you as a potential threat? Guilliman smiled, tired but genuine. Then I'll accept confinement peacefully and hope future events prove my value. I'm not going to fight the people I'm trying to protect, Captain. That would rather defeat the purpose. You'd really submit to imprisonment? I've endured worse, Guilliman said quietly. 10,000 years in stasis, trapped in a broken body, conscious but unable to act while the Imperium I built decayed around me. A few years in Starfleet containment while you determine whether I'm trustworthy? That's manageable. Frustrating, certainly. But manageable. Archer studied the Primarch carefully. You really believe in what we're building, don't you? Despite all your warnings about our weaknesses. I believe in what you're attempting. Guilliman corrected. Whether you succeed is still uncertain. But the attempt itself is valuable. You're trying to build a multi-species civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. That's unprecedented in my experience. Even the Tau Empire in my reality, the closest analog to your Federation, ultimately relies on coercion and caste-based control. You're attempting something genuinely different. And if we fail? Then I'll grieve for the wasted potential and find another way to occupy my existence in this strange reality," Guilliman said. "But I'd rather not fail, Captain. I've seen enough civilizations fall. I'd like to witness one succeeding for a change." The Federation Conference Hall was a temporary structure in San Francisco's Presidio, hastily constructed to accommodate the historic gathering. Delegates from Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, Tellar, and a dozen prospective member worlds filled the amphitheater-style seating. Press representatives, military observers, and diplomatic staff crowded the observation galleries. And standing at the podium, dwarfing it with his armored presence, was Roboute Guilliman. "I am Roboute Guilliman," he began, his voice carrying through the hall with the authority of someone accustomed to addressing millions. "And before you finalize the Federation Charter, before you commit your civilizations to this unprecedented alliance, you deserve to know exactly who has been advising your military planning for the past months." The hall fell silent, every eye fixed on the armored giant. "I am not from your reality," Guilliman stated bluntly. "I am from an alternate dimension, a different version of human development where different crises and different choices led us down a very different path. In my reality, humanity rules an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds, maintained through absolute force, faith, and the kind of authoritarian control that would horrify everyone in this room." Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Soval's expression remained neutral, but his hands stilled. Minister T'Pau leaned forward with analytical interest. Ambassador Thoris of Tellar looked openly skeptical. "I am genetically engineered," Guilliman continued. "Created in a laboratory by the Emperor of Mankind, the founder of my reality's Imperium, to serve as military commander and strategic administrator. Everything about me was designed, my size, my strength, my cognitive capabilities, my resistance to injury and disease. I am transhuman. Post-human. A weapon that thinks and plans and builds civilizations." He paused, letting the implications settle. "I tell you this now because you deserve honesty before making decisions that will shape your future. I've been advising Captain Archer, training Starfleet personnel, and advocating for stronger Federation defenses. You should know that advice comes from someone who has commanded galactic-scale wars, who has built empires, and who understands military force in ways your civilizations have never needed to consider. Why should we trust anything you say?" a Tellarite delegate called out. "You admit to being genetically engineered weapon from a tyrannical empire. For all we know, you're manipulating us toward your own ends. You shouldn't trust me," Guilliman said simply. "Not based on my claims. But you can judge me by my actions over the past months. I've trained your soldiers in tactics that kept them alive against superior forces. I've provided strategic advice that prevented conflicts from escalating. I've risked myself to rescue prisoners and defend civilians. Every action I've taken has strengthened your coalition rather than undermining it. To what purpose?" Minister T'Pau asked with Vulcan directness. "What do you gain from helping the Federation?" "Purpose," Guilliman answered honestly. "In my reality, I ruled part of an empire built on necessary cruelties. I administered worlds through force because the alternatives meant extinction. I became something I never wanted to be because survival required it. Here, in your reality, you're attempting to build something different. Something better. I want to see if it's possible. If cooperation can work. If strength and idealism can coexist." He looked across the assembled delegates. "I'm not asking you to become like my Imperium. I'm begging you not to. But I'm also warning you that idealism without strength is just slow martyrdom. The Romulans are watching you. Other species will test you. Threats you haven't imagined will emerge. You need to be ready. Not as conquerors. As survivors." Admiral Forrest stood from the Earth delegation section. "Mr. Guilliman, Starfleet Command has reviewed Captain Archer's reports extensively. Your tactical contributions are undeniable. But you're asking us to trust someone who admits to being a weapon from an authoritarian empire. How do we know you won't eventually try to impose your Imperium's philosophy on the Federation? You don't, Guilliman said. But consider this, Admiral. If I wanted to conquer you, I wouldn't need to spend months teaching you tactics and building your defenses. I would simply use my capabilities to overwhelm your forces and establish control through direct action. The fact that I'm here, advising rather than commanding, teaching rather than conquering, should indicate my intentions. Or indicate sophisticated long-term manipulation. Ambassador Soville observed. Possible. Guilliman conceded. But inefficient. If I were truly manipulating you towards some secret agenda, I wouldn't have revealed my origins. I'd maintain the deception indefinitely. Instead, I'm providing complete transparency and accepting whatever consequences follow. That's not manipulation, Ambassador. That's trust. Commander Shran stood, his antennae fully forward. The Andorian Imperial Guard has trained alongside the Primarch. I've witnessed his combat capabilities, his tactical thinking, and his commitment to protecting rather than conquering. He fights like a warrior who's seen too much death and wants to prevent more. The Andorian delegation supports his continued involvement with the Federation. The Andorian delegation would support anyone advocating for military buildup. Ambassador Thoris said dismissively. The Andorian delegation supports pragmatic preparation for inevitable conflicts. Shran corrected sharply. Unlike certain species who prefer philosophical debate while enemies gather at the borders. Gentlemen, Guilliman interrupted before the argument could escalate. This is exactly the kind of infighting that will destroy the Federation before external enemies ever reach you. You're so busy arguing about whether to trust me that you're missing the larger point. Whether you trust me or not, the threats are real. The Romulans will test you. Others will follow. You need to decide, now, today, whether this Federation will be strong enough to protect its members or whether it will be a beautiful ideal that collapses under first Rio pressure. He pulled up the proposed charter on the central display. Your current charter has provisions for cooperation, scientific exchange, mutual trade agreements, and diplomatic coordination. All valuable. All necessary. But your defense protocols are dangerously weak. You've created a system where unanimous consent is required for military action, where each species maintains independent forces under independent command, where territorial disputes must go through arbitration that takes weeks. Guilliman highlighted specific sections. I've proposed amendments. Unified rapid response fleet drawn from all member species. Streamlined emergency protocols allowing immediate defense of attacked members. Mandatory military minimums ensuring no member is defenseless. Intelligence sharing requirements preventing one species from hoarding strategic information. These changes don't make you conquerors. They make you survivors. They also concentrate power, Minister Tapa observed. Create potential for military dominance over civilian governance. The Vulcan Science Academy's models suggest these amendments increase likelihood of authoritarian development by 43%. The same models predict what happens if you remain defenseless? Guilliman challenged. Tapa's expression didn't change. Vulnerability to external aggression increases proportionally with military weakness. However, Vulcan philosophy prioritizes what we become over what we survive. Survival through tyranny is not survival of values worth preserving. And I'm suggesting you can have both. Guilliman said with barely contained frustration. You're creating a false choice between strength and principles. You can maintain democratic governance while building capable defenses. You can preserve individual species autonomy while coordinating military response. It requires balance, yes. It requires careful oversight and institutional checks against power concentration. But it's possible. You've never seen it work. Ambassador Thoris pointed out. Your own Imperium became exactly what you fought to prevent. Why should we believe our Federation would be different? Because you're asking the right questions, Guilliman said. Because you're afraid of becoming tyrants, which means you're aware of the danger. The Imperium fell into authoritarianism because we believed survival justified any method. You're starting from the opposite position. worried that any strength leads to corruption. That awareness is your protection. Maintain it. Institutionalize it. Build checks and balances into your military structure. But for the Emperor's sake, build the military structure. He took a breath, controlling his frustration. I've fought in wars that lasted centuries. I've defended worlds against extinction-level threats. I've watched civilizations fall because they weren't prepared for the monsters lurking in the dark. And I'm telling you, begging you, don't let idealism make you vulnerable. You can be strong and good, powerful and principled. But you must choose to be both. Choosing only one guarantees failure. The hall erupted in debate. Earth delegates arguing with Vulcan representatives. Andorians supporting Tellarites objecting. Prospective member worlds watching nervously, uncertain whether to join an alliance that couldn't agree on basic defense protocols. Admiral Forrest called for order, eventually restoring some semblance of calm. Mr. Guilliman, the Admiral said carefully, your passion is evident. Your expertise is valuable. But you're asking us to fundamentally restructure the Federation Charter based on advice from someone we've known for less than 3 months. That's a considerable leap of faith. Then don't trust me, Guilliman said. Trust Captain Archer, who's commanded Enterprise through multiple crises and consistently chosen my tactical advice because it worked. Trust Commander Shran, whose Andorian Guard recognizes sound military doctrine when they see it. Trust your own intelligence services, which have been monitoring Romulan military buildup for months and know the threat is real. He gestured to the assembled delegates. Or better yet, trust yourselves. You've all fought to get here. Earth survived the Shindy crisis. Vulcan endured centuries of conflict before Surex reforms. Andoria built an empire through strength and honor. Tellar maintained independence despite hostile neighbors. You all know that survival requires capability. The only question is whether your coalition will reflect that hard-won wisdom or abandon it for comfortable idealism. Comfortable idealism built the coalition in the first place. Ambassador Sovol pointed out. And I'm suggesting you preserve that idealism by making it sustainable. Guilliman countered. Ideals need foundations, Ambassador. Principles need protection. You can have both. But you must choose to build both. The debate continued for 6 hours. Guilliman answered questions, addressed concerns, clarified proposals, and repeatedly emphasized that he wasn't advocating for authoritarianism but for pragmatic strength. He cited historical precedents from Earth's own past, how the United Nations had failed without enforcement mechanisms, how defensive pacts succeeded when properly structured, how deterrence prevented conflicts better than appeasement. He acknowledged Vulcan concerns about power concentration and proposed oversight committees. He addressed Tellarite worries about dominant species and suggested proportional representation. He worked with Andorian military advisors to refine response protocols. He compromised on timelines and implementation phases. And slowly, painfully slowly, the delegates began accepting amended provisions. Not everything Guilliman proposed. Not even most of it. But enough. The final charter included provisions for a Federation Starfleet, unified command structure drawing ships from member species, emergency defense protocols allowing rapid response to attacks on member worlds, intelligence sharing requirements coordinated through a multi-species agency, mandatory minimum defense capabilities scaled to each member's resources. It wasn't perfect. It was still too bureaucratic, too consensus-driven, too vulnerable to paralysis through disagreement. But it was better than what they'd started with. As the charter signing ceremony commenced, representatives from 4 species affixing their names to the document that would create the United Federation of Planets, Guilliman stood in the observation gallery, watching history unfold. Captain Archer found him there, both of them watching the delegates celebrate. You did it, Archer said. You got them to accept stronger defenses. I got them to accept compromise, Guilliman corrected. It's not as strong as I wanted. Not as unified as it needs to be. But it's a foundation. Something to build on. Something that might keep them alive long enough to learn from their mistakes. You sound disappointed, Archer observed. I'm realistic, Guilliman said. This Federation will face crises. Tests that challenge these compromises. Moments where bureaucracy costs lives and comfort with half measures invites aggression. But they'll learn. They'll adapt. Or they'll fail. Either way, I've done what I can to give them a fighting chance. And what about you? Archer asked. What happens to Roboute Guilliman now that the Federation exists? The Primarch was quiet for a long moment. Starfleet Command has offered me a position, he said finally. Special Advisor on Asymmetric Warfare and Military Strategy. No rank, no official authority, but access to planning sessions and training facilities. I'd essentially be doing what I've been doing, but with formal recognition and oversight. Are you going to accept? I don't know, Guilliman admitted. Part of me wants to. Wants to continue helping, teaching, building something better than the Imperium. But another part recognizes that the Federation needs to develop independence from me. They can't rely on a transhuman advisor forever. Eventually, they need to stand alone. So you'll leave? Eventually, Guilliman confirmed. But not yet. There's still work to do. The Romulans will test the new Federation within months. Other species will probe for weaknesses. And someone needs to ensure the unified Starfleet actually develops the capabilities it's supposed to have rather than becoming another bureaucratic institution. He looked at Archer directly. I'll stay until I'm no longer necessary, Captain. Until the Federation is strong enough to survive without me. Then I'll find another purpose, another way to occupy an existence that never ends. But for now, for however long they need me, I'll be here. The Federation is lucky to have you, Archer said. The Federation is lucky I arrived when I did, Guilliman corrected. A few years earlier, and I'd have tried to reshape humanity into something closer to the Imperium. A few years later, and I'd have found a Federation too set in its ways to accept change. The timing was fortuitous. Almost as if something was guiding events. You think there's a reason you ended up here? Archer asked. Guilliman smiled slightly. I think the universe occasionally provides opportunities for redemption. Whether we recognize them or waste them is up to us. I'm trying very hard not to waste this one. That night, in temporary quarters provided by Starfleet, Roboute Guilliman stood before a window overlooking San Francisco Bay, watching lights reflect on the water. He composed one final message to the Emperor, the father he would never see again, across a dimensional gulf that could not be bridged. Father, I've done what I can. I've taught them tactics. I've strengthened their defenses. I've helped them build something that might survive the galaxy's cruelties without becoming cruel themselves. It's not perfect. It's not the Imperium. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps this is my chance to guide humanity down the path we never took. To prove that strength and compassion can coexist. To show that your dream of a united humanity didn't have to become the nightmare it became. I don't know if I'll succeed. But I'm trying, Father. I'm trying to honor your vision while avoiding your mistakes. I hope, wherever you are, whatever timeless vigil you keep, you'd approve. Your son, Guilliman. He didn't delete this message. Instead, he encrypted it, stored it in the armor of fate's deepest memory cores, and marked it as a testament. If he ever found a way home, if the impossible became possible, he would deliver it personally. Until then, it would remain here, a promise to himself. To be better. To do better. To prove that humanity could be strong without losing its soul. Outside, in the San Francisco night, the United Federation of Planets celebrated its birth. And standing watch over that celebration, a genetically engineered demigod from a reality of eternal war allowed himself the smallest flicker of hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this humanity would succeed where his had failed. Maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found a cause worth the centuries of pain that had led him here. Time would tell. But for tonight, Roboute Guilliman was content simply to watch humanity take its first tentative steps toward a future that might, against all odds, be genuinely better. The United Federation of Planets was born under stars that had witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall. But this time, something was different. This time, humanity and its allies had a guardian who understood both the necessity of strength and the value of restraint. Roboute Guilliman never returned to his Imperium. The dimensional breach that had brought him to this reality remained forever sealed, leaving him stranded in a universe both familiar and utterly alien. But he found purpose in that exile. He trained the first generation of Starfleet tactical officers, teaching them to fight enemies stronger, faster, and better equipped than themselves. He advised Federation Council during the Romulan War that came 5 years after the Charter signing. A conflict the Federation won not through overwhelming force, but through the strategic principles he'd patiently taught them. He watched humanity and its allies navigate crises he'd predicted and challenges he'd never imagined, always guiding, never commanding. He became legend, the armored giant who appeared when the Federation needed him most and vanished when the danger passed. Some called him Guardian. Others called him Ghost. The Romulans called him the reason Earth could not be conquered. The Klingon called him worthy adversary. Starfleet simply called him friend. And perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all, that a weapon designed for galactic conquest had become, in this gentle reality, simply someone trying to help. The Federation survived its early years. It grew stronger without becoming cruel. It maintained its principles while developing the strength to defend them. It proved that cooperation could work, that diversity was advantage, that idealism could survive contact with reality when properly protected.